AB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Monday, August 14th. Ryan, that means we are 1 week away, exactly 1 week from today. We will be kicking off our in-season content plan because it will be game week for Notre Dame. Week 0 action against Navy next week. Obviously, we're now 12 days away from Notre Dame kicking off the 2023 season. And Ryan, it felt like it was a good time. We're going to kind of move the schedule around this week. You're going to do a recruiting hour on Thursday. And so we're going to have that on Thursday. And then I have because I have a speaking thing I have to do on Thursday. And then today we felt like it was a good time to talk about the schedule. And we're going to have several shows this week. We're going to do our prediction show this week. We're going to do a whole lot of different stuff. We're actually going to have a Wednesday night show. It's going to be a prediction show this week. Going to have all types of fun stuff. It's going to be a blast this week, kind of getting ready for the season. Going to have a couple CFB Nation shows this week. I'm doing something probably tonight with Bill Bender. We might even go live. Got to talk with Bill about it, where we're going to kind of talk about Notre Dame and the ACC and just a lot of different things going on, Ryan. But today, obviously, the AP poll came out today. Notre Dame was ranked 13th. That means they are ranked 13th in both polls. And now I can correctly say what I said last week about the coaches poll, which is actually incorrect. But it's correct about the AP poll. The last time Notre Dame won a national championship was also the last time Notre Dame was ranked 13th in the AP poll, which is 1988. The last two playoff teams for Notre Dame, 2018, Notre Dame began the season ranked 12th in the AP poll, and in 2020 they began the season ranked 10th in the AP poll. So a lot going on, and I believe part of the reason they ranked 10th, Ryan, is because I have to go back and look at that one, because I think that some of the teams weren't ranked, if I remember, because they weren't going to necessarily play. If I remember correctly, I have to go back and look at that. But it was a very interesting ranking system that year. So, Ryan, we'll dive into that stuff here as we kind of go out to the kind of dive into this conversation. But what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break down the Notre Dame schedule. We're going to talk about it. I'll just kind of quickly go over it here in a second. We're going to dive into it 1 through 12, or 12 through 1, I should say, is probably a better way of doing it. Yes, Ryan, I was correct. The AP poll, the preseason AP poll began with Ohio State at I'm partially correct. It began with Ohio State at 2, but they were not in the week 1 poll, because at that point in time they weren't playing.
Gotcha.
So Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Wisconsin, Michigan, USC, Minnesota, Utah, Iowa State, and Iowa all dropped out after the preseason poll came out.
So everything got bumped up a little bit.
Yes. So but Notre Dame did start 10th in that poll and then moved up to 7 when everybody got dropped out. So before they played any games. So we're going to dive into the schedule, Ryan, and the way that we rank the schedule is not just the 12 best teams, because we could do that and there's nothing wrong with that. But the way we want to do it is we want to kind of dive into more of a toughest games for Notre Dame. And toughest can mean a lot of different things. It can mean this particular team is a tough matchup for Notre Dame. This particular team, where the game was played, is it right before a big game? Is it after a big game? Is it during finals week or not? Is it on the road? Is it at home? Is it early? Is it late? What's the makeup of that team? And we'll have some interesting conversation about it. So it's more about the toughness of the game for Notre Dame. So who they play, when they play, where they play, all that stuff we'll take into account, as opposed to just here's the 12 best teams. Because the reality is, Ryan, when you look at this, not every game is the same because of the home away factor and when you play. I think to truly get a gauge of how challenging a schedule is, you have to take into account the context of when and where those games are played.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of factors that exist there. I mean, because we're not crystal ball seers, right? Like that, it even goes even deeper than that. I mean, we could talk about the home versus away and after a bye, before a bye, where it's sandwiched in between, what the general play style is of some of these teams. All those things kind of go into the forecast, but I mean, what are the injuries coming into that game? What's the weather coming into that game? There's so many different things that matter in these types of situations, but it's always fun because I think these situations are really fun too, Brian, because I always love kind of looking back at what our thoughts were on some of these teams in the preseason and just seeing how they matched, right? Like, were they exactly what we thought they were? Were they completely different as far as the opponents on the schedule? So I think these conversations are really fun, though, because there's a lot of factors that go into this conversation. Yeah. I almost texted you this last night when you sent me the list. I was like, after you said this is a combination of the team, but also, schedule wise.
Yeah, because I forgot to tell you that at first. Yeah.
But when you sent me that, I was like, wow, well, that's a lot of factors into one conversation.
That's exactly. This is what Ryan texted me because I don't know. I have to think about it because I said, hey, this is the 12, and I didn't give him the context. Forgot to send him that because I assumed that Ryan's in year 2 at Irish Breakdown. He should be able to read my mind now, but apparently not yet. He said, I don't know. I have to think about that. That's a lot of factors to consider. But it is true, right? And that's what kind of adds to the difficulty of playing an opponent. We talked about this a lot last year. Do you want to play Ohio State early or do you want to play Ohio State late? What are the benefits of playing them early? What are the benefits of playing them late? And there's all types of factors that go into that, Ryan. And we'll have some of that here today as well. So let's just quickly go through the schedule. Obviously, Notre Dame kicks off this year at August 26th, playing Navy in Dublin, Ireland. Come home the next week for a home opener, which is week 1 of the college football season against the Tennessee State Tigers, who were 4-7 last year. Then they play at NC State. It's only the second time Notre Dame has ever played at NC State. Hopefully the weather will be a little bit better this time than the only other time they've played at NC State. Return home for a game 4 matchup against the Central Michigan Chippewas. Then they host the Ohio State Buckeyes on September 23rd, and then September 30th, Notre Dame plays at Duke. So Notre Dame, right, and you've said this before, and it's so hard to grasp, Notre Dame will be halfway through their schedule before the calendar turns to October.
It's wild.
October 7th, they play at Louisville. Then they are at home on October 14th for a matchup against the Southern Cal Trojans. Then over the next 4 weeks, they have 2 byes. They have a bye between Southern Cal, USC, and Pitt. They play Pitt on October 28th. Then they travel to Clemson on November 4th. Then another bye. And they play Wake Forest at home. And then they finish the season at Stanford. Very interesting schedule, Ryan. Just your overall thoughts on the schedule. I personally think it's a slightly better, tougher schedule than last year from just a pure opponent's standpoint. I think the opponents are better. The big 3 is still the big 3. But the next 3 or 4 teams, to me, you look at the Dukes and you look at the NC States and the Pitts and the Louisvilles, there's a lot of quality football teams in that schedule, yes, in my opinion, that are, to me, a little better than what they faced last year. But the good news is you get 2 of the big 3 at home this year, as opposed to last year where 2 of the 3 are on the road, right? So just overall thoughts on the schedule before we kind of dive into the 1 through 12.
It's so funny you say the little notes because with Duke being the 6th game of the season on September 30th, like having 6 games in the first month plus of the season is just wild because quick story, me and my wife Caitlin are planning to go down for the Duke game and she thought it was in October originally. She's like, isn't that game 6? I was like, yeah, and it's September 30th. Like, it's pretty wild to think about, right? But I think that for me, when I look at this schedule, a couple of the key things that I look at is because I know you love to break it up into sections, right? Like by 4s. And I think when you look at it
I'll do some of that on the site. We'll do that on the site, not necessarily today.
But I like when we do that, though, because the first 4 games of the season, I think, are a great opportunity for Notre Dame with a graduate transfer quarterback that is still working for his first game action at the University of Notre Dame, other than the Blue Gold game, and with a lot of younger players that are still getting experience. I think that the first 4-game stretch is a really nice little buffer for the rest of the Notre Dame season. Yeah, you have NC State that's sandwiched in between there in game 3, but for the most part, the first 4 games are all very winnable football games for Notre Dame, and I think you kind of ease the team into what is a very difficult second stretch of that next 4. Like, it's a very, very difficult. Ultimately, for me, I like how it sets up. I really do, because I look at it, and when you break it up into the 4s, I say the first 4, you have a great opportunity to come out of that 4-0, going into a very difficult next 4. And then the last 4 has a couple of difficult games in it, but it's definitely not as hard as the second set of 4.
And lots of chances to get rested in that last 4 too, Ryan. That last quarter, you've got to bye before the 4th quarter of the season. The thirds, right? The way the first quarter is, if we do it by quarters, it's Navy, Tennessee to NC State.
Yep.
right? So it's kind of 2 warm-up games before the really tough game. The second quarter is Central Michigan, Ohio State, and Duke. So you got a warm-up game before 2 really tough tests. The third quarter is at Louisville, USC, and Pitt. I would argue that's the toughest, just 3 pure opponents.
Yes.
Is Louisville, USC, and Pitt. Now, I have USC not in my top 2 of toughest opponents this season, but it's just because you've got Navy, Tennessee State in the first one, you've got Central Michigan in the second one, you've got Wake and Stanford in the third one with Clemson. And then, of course, the fourth quarter is Clemson, Wake, and Stanford. So you actually have buys in each of the last 2 quarters. But if you break it down into thirds, Ryan, when you look at like the groups of 4, that last group of 4, you've got 2 buys in there too. And so,
Exactly.
you're going to play a lot of games before you get a bye, but then you're going to be able to get 2 chances to kind of really get right later in the season. I don't know if I like that or not, Ryan. We'll have to find out. Like, I kind of would have liked to have had a bye maybe after Ohio State, maybe mix it up a little bit, so you play those first 4 or first 5, then have a bye, then play Duke, Louisville, USC, Pitt, then have a bye, and then Clemson, Wake, and Stanford. Didn't work out that way, but that's basically where Notre Dame is. So, and then of course the November bye is only there because Notre Dame's starting in week 0. Right. That's basically the reason Notre Dame has 2 byes. Some years, Ryan, there are just 2 byes built into everyone's schedule, just the way that the first Saturday works out. But this year Notre Dame has the 2 byes because they have the week 0 game in Dublin against Navy. Yep. And I've kind of come around on the whole. I get the bet. I don't know when the best time is to play Navy, but I've kind of come around to where I think the opener is best because you don't have to then spend a ton of time in camp working on the option, which they do every year for a game you don't play till November, like last year. I don't know how that helps you, right? But now you're working on those things because you're going to need it for the first game, and once it's out of the way, you don't have to worry about that mess anymore.
Because what was Navy last year? What game were they? I know
they were after Clemson, Ryan. They were like 9 or 10. They were like 10, I believe. Let me just go look at it real quick.
I personally don't like a triple option team and a team
10.
that's on your schedule every single year. I don't like them kind of sneaking up on you a little bit, right? Like I just kind of like it being in the front. Get over it, get it done with, and let's move on to the more traditional teams that we're going to play. Like I just that uniqueness, I think, is just. It's just not one of those ones where it's like, I'm coming off a big win. Now we're going to go play a not great Navy team. And then they sneak up on you like they did last year in the second half. Where you're just like, come on, man. Like, it's just annoying at this point. So I like kind of getting them out of the way personally.
We talked last week, Ryan, about how, we don't do the superstition thing, but I'm going to have some fun with it, today a little bit, just so we can, we're having some fun. Season hasn't started yet. But the last time Notre Dame actually played in the national championship game, they kicked the season off against Navy in Ireland. The last time Notre Dame won a national championship, they were ranked 13th in the preseason poll. And the last time that Ohio State won a championship, a team that Notre Dame has to go through, do you know who they kicked the season off with that year in 2014, Ryan?
Navy.
It's Navy. That's right. That's right. So all types of fun things. Obviously, none of that stuff has anything to do with who's actually going to win a championship, but it's always fun to kind of joke about that kind of stuff.
Well, this is the fun time of the year, though, man, because now this is our final look at the seasons before we started. I don't know if you heard this, Brian. This is completely unrelated, but Jaden Greathouse was interviewed the other day by the media, obviously, and he made a crack at Sam Hartman. I don't know if you heard this one, but they asked about Sam. They asked him about Sam, and he's like, yeah, I grew up watching Sam, so it's really cool to be able to play with him now. I'm like, yo. But it's funny because he's in his 6th year, so you're like.
He was in middle school. Wow.
He was probably, 13 when Sam Hartman started playing college football?
He would have been in the 7th grade when Sam Hartman was a freshman, right?
So, yeah, 13 that's wild. That's so weird.
7th or 8th grade, that is wild. Yeah, that is wild. That is great. I love this stuff. It's going to be a fun year, Ryan. Very, very much looking forward to it. Let's dive into the schedule. Let's break it down, right? Let's get to this. And we're going to have a mailbag afterwards. So if you guys have some questions, go for it. If you want to know sort of what the latest about Notre Dame's recruiting in the 25 class is going on, we put a little intel piece on the board that Ryan and I have been working on the last few days to get. People keep asking about the hat, another bookstore hat. Got this at the Notre Dame bookstore. It's very nice, Ryan. It's a fitted hat. So it's got that on the front, on the back. So I dig it, man. It's actually navy blue. It looks black, I think, on the screen. I don't know what it looks like to you, Ryan, but it's actually navy blue. It's a very dark navy blue. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very cool hat. And of course, I got the navy blue IB shirt on today. You can get this
Same.
in the IB store today, right? So yeah, so we didn't plan that, y'all. It's just see now Ryan's reading my mind, right? I wanted him to read my mind about the schedule. He didn't. He reads my mind about the gear. All good.
There was only 2 options of shirt to wear today, so
Yeah.
50%, I guess. On
That's
the day,
right.
so.
That's right. I need to get you some new gear, man. Give me your sizes. Tell me what you want. We'll get you some new gear to kick the season
You
off.
need
Some fresh
no.
stuff.
What you need to give me is more time so that I can do laundry more efficiently and more
There you go.
consistently.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. Yeah, good luck with that. I think I've given you plenty of time, but there's just never enough, man. There's never enough.
Never enough.
See, you're blaming me for the fact that you got 2
Oh,
kids
I'm
now.
not blaming anyone.
Don't
I'm not blaming anyone.
I didn't make you have a second kid. I'm just saying. I'm just messing with you. We're having some fun today, guys.
You always tell me to be happy, man. So
I did, and I family first, right? I always tell you those 2 things. So family first. But you can tell Ryan and I are a little extra giddy today because it's just like it hit us. The football season is like almost here, y'all. Like, do you understand? Like, we're fired up.
Need it.
I even watched a little preseason NFL football, Ryan. Can you believe it?
Ooh.
Can you believe
what games
it?
You watch?
I watched a little bit of the Broncos game.
Oh, nice.
So, yeah.
How'd they look?
Yep. I mean, like a first preseason game, but I mean, they did some nice things. They Russ led them on 2 scoring drives. They were up 10-0 at halftime.
Judy had a touchdown, right?
Yeah, right after he dropped the touchdown. They ran a little 3rd and 5 bootleg. He just dropped it. Then they went right back to him on 4th and 5. He caught it, smoked the guy on a slant, and smoked the guy for a touchdown.
That.
Yeah. And then they did miss 2 field goals. They ended up losing 18-17, but honestly, I turned it off at halftime because I didn't want to watch a bunch of dudes that aren't going to be on the team in a month. So, yeah, it was pretty cool.
At least you didn't have to watch Stetson Bennett play quarterback for your favorite team.
No, yeah, that would suck. I had to watch Jarrett Stidham do that. So, I mean, it ain't that much better.
Baylor and Auburn legend, Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, there you go. So let's get into the schedule, Ryan. As we said before, the schedule that we're going to break down, our kind of our ranking 1 to 12 is geared more towards toughest games, not best opponents to worst opponents. It's toughest games. And so that includes what the matchup means for Notre Dame. That's a part of the equation. We get into when the game is being played. Now, that can be a lot of things. Are you getting a team early or are you getting a team late? Do we project them to be better early or better late? We'll get into some of that. It's also when you play is also, we talked about this, Ryan, it's the notion of like sort of that trap game aspect of it, right? Like we look at last year, that letdown after the Ohio State game and a little bit of a letdown after the Clemson game. Like Notre Dame comes out of the Clemson game with a big win and they are just rolling Navy and then maybe started to feel a little good about themselves. And then the second half of Navy happened and it kind of smacked them back into reality, right? But you always have some of those type of things. That factors into it as well. So we'll get into all that kind of stuff, where the game is being played. If 2 teams are pretty equal, one's on the road, one's at home, you tend to put the team that's on the road a little tougher, right? Just the nature of that aspect of it. So those are all the factors that go into it, Ryan. And when you break down the number 12 team, this is an easy one. It's the Tennessee State Tigers. It's actually going to be a really interesting weekend, I think. This is Notre Dame's first opponent against a first time they've ever played an FCS opponent. This Tennessee State's coming off of a back-to-back seasons of 5-6 and 4-7. Also happens to be the first 2 years of the Eddie George tenure, former Ohio State running back and Tennessee Titan running back, which the Tennessee State, and of course Heisman Trophy winner, who played against Notre Dame during his career with the Buckeyes. So this isn't close, Ryan. This is not just an FCS team. It's not a given that an FCS team is going to be at the bottom of your schedule. If you got North Dakota State on your schedule, South Dakota State on the schedule, it's South Dakota State's that's really good, correct? The Jackrabbits are the really good ones. They would probably rank higher on this list ahead of Stanford for me and Central Michigan for me and maybe even Navy for me. But Tennessee State's Coach George is trying to obviously rebuild that program. So this is clearly the game that is at the bottom of the list as far as toughness.
I mean, it's the first home game too, right? I mean, everyone's going to be pumped up. And we always talk about, I think, Brian, the letdown games that happen are usually the ones that like you're not really focused for whatever reason. Maybe it's a, back-to-back home game. It's the second home game where it's just like the energy's gone. There's not a much adrenaline happening. But coming back from Dublin, it's going to be your first home game is against Tennessee State, an FCS opponent. That's not a great FCS opponent. I know a lot of people are thinking this in their mind of like, wasn't the first home game for Notre Dame last year against Marshall? And I get that, right? But Marshall is a good football team, right?
Yes.
Like that was 4-7 on the FCS level. So this is not a very good football team. There's a couple solid players that I actually look forward to talking about when Notre Dame plays them that week. I mean, did you know their starting corner is Bryce Phillips, who is the younger brother of Clark Phillips that played at Utah, who's actually a really good corner. So there's going to be some quality football players, but for the most part, you're talking about a below average FCS team coming to Notre Dame Stadium. Notre Dame's first home game of the season. I think Notre Dame will be laser focused in that game. And I think that we always talk about what did a coaching staff learn from first season to second season? I think it's how to focus a team consistently from a week to week basis, right? And to not let the Marshalls of the world happen on your first home game of the season. So I think Marcus Freeman is going to have that team ready to go against a not great opponent at home. I just don't see that one being particularly close this year.
And on top of the fact, we keep saying this, and I remember debating this with Vince last year when Vince was like, he had Marshall as the lowest team on the schedule. And I was like, dude, you are vastly underrating Marshall. I think I had Marshall in the top 6 or 7 of last year's schedule. Ryan, that was a good football team for that level. No excuse for Notre Dame to lose to them. None.
Yep.
But Tennessee State's closer to Stanford than they are to Marshall, as far as if you want to talk about being upset. But this is just, like you said, not a very good FCS team. Notre Dame could play pretty poorly in this game and still win by double figures. You just hope that doesn't happen. So this is why that game is number 12 on the schedule. Number 11 on the schedule. We agree on this one, right? And we're for the most part on the same page. I think there's like 2 or 3 areas where we said slight disagreements, which we'll express those. We had the same on number 11, Central Michigan. This is a team, Jim McElwain, former Florida head coach and Alabama offensive coordinator, is their head coach. They're coming off of a 4-8 season that I actually thought showed promise early, Ryan. I actually kind of liked what I saw early in the season from Central Michigan. If you remember, they played Oklahoma State really competitively in the opener. They ended up losing by
a lot.
Yeah, they ended up losing by 2 touchdowns, but it was more competitive than that. They scored 44 points. They only scored over 40 one more time the rest of the year. That was against Bucknell. And then, of course, the next week they lose by 2 touchdowns at home to South Alabama. Finally get a W against Bucknell, and then just got blown out pretty much the rest of the way. Of their losses last season, Ryan, I think I had down 2 of them were by single digits. Every other one was – actually, I noted it. Every other one was by at least – like 17 points, something like that. They weren't competitive. 16 points. They weren't competitive in a lot of games and finished 4-8. And on top of that, they lose like 8 or 9 starters on defense, which is going to hurt.
And they lost some quality football players as well. I think that it was a more talented team than what the record indicated as far as like the level of talent. I mean, they lost their running back, Lou Nichols, who was led the NCAA in rushing the year before, right? Like Lou Nichols, you lose. Daniel Richardson, your quarterback, is gone, who had some promise. And then Travis Incombe, who's our defensive end, was actually a late round draft pick, I believe, if not a priority free agent, who had double-digit sacks last year for Central Michigan as well. So you lost 3 of your best football players off of a not very good football team, right? Yeah. So I hope Coach Ed McElwain can get it turned around, but I have a feeling that team's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better moving forward here.
Yeah, I have the same feeling, Ryan. They're going to struggle. So they're 11 now. You and I have the next 2 flipped, but it's kind of like a flip of the coin. It's not really that big of a disagreement. It's like we think 2 bad teams. Which one's worse than the other team? I have Stanford in the number 10 spot. You have Navy in the number 10 spot. I have Navy in the 9 spot. You have Stanford in the 9 spot. So we have them basically the same spots, just kind of flipped around. We'll talk about Stanford first. The only reason that I would even consider moving them up to 9 is because the more I've researched about Troy Taylor, the more I like. I think he did some really nice things at Sacramento State. The problem is he doesn't have a very good quarterback. He lost a lot from an already not very good offensive line. Lost some pretty talented players on the offensive skill positions. Yes, they get Benjamin Urasek back, but they lost a lot. They do get E.J. Smith back, too, who got hurt early last season, which should help their run game a little bit, but who's blocking for him? And then they don't have much coming back from a defense that just pretty much was bad last year. I know that some of you all may not know that their defense was bad last year because you only watched the game that Notre Dame played against them, but against everyone else, their defense was bad. So Stanford's a tough one. Obviously, you play the game on the road. It's the last game of the season. but I just think Stanford's going to really struggle this year under Coach Shed. Now, I do think they're going to get it turned around somewhat quickly, Ryan, as long as this whole conference realignment stuff doesn't hurt them too bad in recruiting, because he's putting together a really quality 2024 recruiting class so far, including getting a Notre Dame legacy in Emmett Mosley Jr. So I really like what he's doing on the recruiting trail. The problem is just right now, the team he inherits is a mess. And not only they lose guys to the NFL, but they lost a lot of guys to the portal as well.
They did. This is a projection of breathing a breath of fresh air into a program that needed a breath of fresh air, right? Like that's kind of what I see with this team is I don't think Stanford's going to be a good football team, obviously, or I wouldn't have them as lowly ranked as, in that spot. I think what I'm betting on here, at least from the entirety of Stanford, is that Stanford will be a little bit more energetic and actually look like they want to be there on a week-to-week basis, right? Like I just think that team had kind of given up on David Shaw, to be honest. Like they kind of tapped out over the last couple of years. And I think that, honestly, they had some talent over the last couple of years. I mean, I look at some guys like Miles Hinton and Walter Rouse and Tanner McKee, and you mentioned EJ Smith that's back, and Benjamin Yorosek. Like there's more talent than what they've been winning over the last couple of years. But the problem is I think that everything just got kind of monotonous, man. They're just like, it's the same old thing every single week. And there was just no energy in that program. Troy Taylor, and I think it's emulated a lot by the recruiting thing that he's been doing right now, because you mentioned it, right? Commitments from Elijah Brown, commitments from Emmett Mosley, commitments from guys like Benedict Ume, who's a talented player, obviously, out of the Northeast. I just think that Troy Taylor is at least going to get the most out of this team. Now, it's not a very talented roster for sure, but I think they might be a team that just plays a little bit over their head this year, because they finally, for the first time in a long time now, or at least the first time in a couple of years, they have new, which sometimes new can kind of spur some like new energy. And that's kind of what I'm counting on for Stanford is hopefully there's some new energy. And if you have an upset or two throughout the season, maybe you're a little bit better than people expect, then coming into that last game of the season against Notre Dame, it's like, hey guys, even if we're not going to go bowling this year, let's shock the world and let's beat Notre Dame for the second time in 2 years and get this regime started on the right pathway. That's kind of just what I see with Stanford. I just think they might have a breath of fresh air in that program this year.
Couple things that went into this decision for me, Ryan. Part of me wanted to put Stanford ahead of Navy, or like ranked higher than Navy, because of the fact that they're both new coaches, but Navy's going to be in week 1 and Stanford's in week 12. And the initial thought process was, well, you're going to get Stanford 11 games into the new coaching staff. And that was kind of something that led to me. There's two factors that or why I place Navy ahead. Number one is we don't really know what Navy's going to run on offense, and there's going to be that element of surprise. Whereas if Notre Dame was playing Stanford in week 1, you know what he runs, right? You just, how's it going to fit the personnel? But you know what Troy Taylor runs. They're talking about playing 2 quarterbacks. We'll dive into this next week a little bit more, but like those are 2 very different quarterbacks. One of them's an option guy. One of them's sort of a more traditional-ish player. And I think that's just part of the attempt to play mind games, right? And so we'll see what they do. That factored into it as well. The other part to me that I even considered dropping Navy lower than even Central Michigan is just simply because of this. By week 12, I have a bad feeling about where their roster is going to be, because they're just going to have the natural attrition that happens in college football, and their depth chart is already incredibly thin anyway. And that's another reason I went with Navy ahead of Stanford. But they're very similar teams as far as just not being that good. But the Navy game kind of concerns me a little bit.
Yeah.
Next,
it's like a prettier pig conversation, right?
Yes,
like which one do you want?
Yes. The only thing is I would say Navy to me would have the greater chance of pulling off an upset because of the junky offense that they run. And honestly, that even caused me to consider ranking them even higher, just from a toughness standpoint, was the not knowing really what they're going to run.
They're going to come out in the air raid. I can feel it.
It's going to be something funky. I mean, it
Phil
is.
Longo disciple's going to be down in Navy.
Notre Dame's going to be thinking they're running a triple, and they're just going to come out some funky stuff. It's going to be interesting for sure. Number 8 on our list, Ryan, is Wake Forest, which is the last home game of the season. It just kind of worked out this way. It's not like they moved the Wake Forest game here because they got Sam Hartman. It was already scheduled. But Notre Dame Senior Day is going to be Sam Hartman playing against his former team, the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Wake is actually I think they're still a bowl caliber team this year, Ryan. I do.
Yeah.
They've got some talent coming back. Taylor Moore at receiver. I think the Williams kid comes back a receiver.
Jamal Banks.
Yes, he comes back. The couple things though. Obviously, the quarterback situation is not going to be as good. Although the kid that replaced him last year has been in the system for a few years, and actually,
Mitch Griffiths.
yeah, he handled himself well because if people remember, he actually started the opener when Sam Hartman was out. Now they played VMI, but he went 21 of 29 for 288 yards and 3 touchdowns.
My buddy actually said that kid has a pretty live arm.
Yeah, he does.
So
he does. I don't think the accuracy is as good as what it showed in that game, in my opinion. Yeah, but this is a kid that's got some tools. He's a good sized kid. I mean, he's not actually not a good size. He's like a thick kid. He's kind of short, but he's a thick kid. So he's a kid that's kind of built to take a little bit of a pounding, I think, more so than he was early in his career. He can run around a little bit, in the pocket. But to me, he's got a live arm. I just don't think he's Sam Hartman, number one. Their offensive line took more hits this offseason. They've had now 2 years in a row with suffering big offensive line hits. And then recently it was announced that Donovan Green was going to be out for 3 to 5 months. That's a huge blow. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah. It really does.
That kid just can't stay healthy. He's talented, man. He actually had a pretty decent NFL grade this offseason because he's a talented athlete, but it's just unfortunate he can't stay healthy.
Really good basketball player. He was a really good basketball player in high school. But yeah, he was their number 2 receiver last year from a yard standpoint at 642, and he was, at 37 catches, 642 yards, 6 touchdowns. So you lose your number 1 and now your number 2 receivers from last year. Again, good news is even without them, a combination of Keyshawn Williams, Taylor Moran, and Jamal Banks is still a really good receiving core. All right. Sure. I mean, so the kid's not going to be hurting for talent at receiver. No. And I believe their tight end is also back, Ryan. I think Whitehart's back as well.
No, he's gone. He was in the NFL draft.
Did he leave? Okay, so he left early. He still had eligibility left. And then, of course, the other problem that Wake Forest has, and this is really what kept them down for me, is their defense is still really bad.
Yeah. And they lost one of their best player in Buckroyd this offseason to Oklahoma. So
Yep. And so I think that's going to hurt them a little bit. And I don't know that they necessarily did anything to make it better, in my opinion. So that's why I have Wake Forest there at the number 8. And then, of course, getting it home. It's not like you're going to have Sam Hartman overlooking Wake Forest. No. If anything, the concern is he a little too emotional about the game? But, I mean, if he's the competitor we think he is, he's going to want to have his best game that week. Well, and not out of spite or ill will, just kind of it's kind of what you want to do.
I mean, I could see that being a game where Hartman is just like amped, right? But like amped in a good way, not amped as in like, I want to make every throw perfect and I'm just like uptight the whole time. But I could see, because it's also because I mean, for me, Brian, it's like Notre Dame getting juice against a team like Wake Forest, right? Like it's not a super like sexy, like, oh man, that's a great team. I want to beat their brains in, yada, yada, yada. I think that having Hartman here is a great motivation factor for the rest of the team. Like, hey, man, we want to win for our guy, for our QB1 and have his Sam Hartman revenge game. Even though I know things ended well with like their relationship, I still think that they'll want to show out in that game.
Number 7, Ryan, we had a little bit of a disagreement. Our next 3 are all the same. We just have them ordered a little bit differently. I have Pitt at number 7. Now, here's some things about Pitt. I think that you could make a case that the next 4 teams could all be rearranged in some order. And those 4 are Louisville, NC State, Pitt, and Duke. Now, we both have Duke at 4, which we'll get into in a little bit. But you can make a case that some other teams could be higher for other factors that we could get into. But here's why I have Pitt where I have Pitt. Of the other 3 teams we're in consideration here, this is the one that's at home. This is a home game. It comes after a bye week. So Notre Dame will get a chance to kind of get rested and get refreshed and get back on track. Because I've always said this, bye weeks are best for just recovery. That's the best thing about a bye week. I think putting in a bunch of new stuff during the bye week can actually be detrimental. I think the ORI on that, it can sometimes be not ideal, but it's a great rest. You're coming off of a really tough 4-game stretch against Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, and USC. Be a good get healthy type of period for Notre Dame. And with Pitt, they've lost a lot of talent the last 2 years. They lost Jordan Addison 2 years ago. This past year, they lost the running back who's, top 10 rusher in college football. He's top 5 rusher in
Yeah.
college football last year.
I love that kid,
Yeah.
Abaconda. Yeah, he was a really good
Yeah,
player.
he's a really good football player. He's in the NFL now. They have some players coming back, Ryan. I don't love the talent that Pitt has. They've got some good players coming back. There's not a lot of overall talent there, but the combination of it being at home and the uncertainty of who Phil Dracovic is going to be is why I have Pitt here. Now, what I would say is if Phil Dracovic gets back to being the 2020 version of Phil Dracovic, then you can
Right.
make a case that Pitt should be fourth on this list when you consider how tough Pitt has tended to play Notre Dame in the past. But for all the stuff we talk about how tough Pitt plays Notre Dame, let's not forget that 2 of the last 3 times Notre Dame and Pitt have played, Notre Dame has blown Pitt out,
Sure.
right? So, so there's that as well. It's really the Jurkovic thing is the thing for me. Right now, he is the beat up, played behind a bad O-line, hasn't been healthy the last 2 years. And if he goes down, I think they're really in trouble, in my opinion, because I don't think that I think there's going to be a drop off there at quarterback. But if he's healthy and mentally and physically, he's now playing for the OC that he had his success at BC with.
Yep.
And you could jump them up. But right now, we've seen this too many times with quarterbacks, Ryan, when you go through that sort of that they get broke mentally and physically, they don't often come back from that. And so I got to see Jurkovic do that before I'm going to buy that he can be that quarterback again. And he doesn't have a Zay Flowers to throw to on this one. And him and Zay were great because Phil threw a really good deep ball, and Zay was a great deep ball pass catcher. He's not going to have the weapons he had at Pitt this year. Not that they're bad weapons, but that receiving core he had in 2020 was really good that season. And that's kind of where I have them a little lower. And I don't love the talent they have come up. And we talk about the running back, but losing it's Cansey, right? I always want to say Clancy. Cansey. Yeah. That's a big loss too, because that was a very productive interior defensive lineman for them last year.
It was. I think for me, usually when quarterbacks get broken, though, usually they don't land in better situations after you get broken, point. Right? Like that's kind of the difference here. I think a little bit is that Phil Dracovic somehow is going to a team that is upgraded as far as the protection he's going to have, which I think is great. He's also going to be able to, yes, you lose a great player in Abacananda, but I think that Pitt is usually a good running team, right? Like they usually are able to at least find some good running backs that are able to play a game. I know Rodney Hammonds, I think, is a pretty talented running back that's coming back for them. And they have a good offensive line. Matthew Goncalves at left tackle is going to be a top 50 draft pick next year. They have some good offensive linemen coming back, even with a couple defections. But I think that offensive line is going to be good. I think they're going to be able to run the football. And I think that Phil Dracovic, as long as he's just serviceable enough in that system, I think that he's going to be an upgrade over what they had in Keaton Slovis last year. And despite having last year, despite having the limitations as a passer and Keaton Slovis, I mean, you still went 9-4, right? I mean, you were still a pretty good football team. So I think that for me, I expect them to still play good defense. I expect them to be able to run the football, and I expect their offensive line to be good. And I
thought their defense took a step back last year, though, Ryan. That's kind of where I come from on that. Is I don't think their defense is going to be as good as it's been in past years, and we did see that. We saw some slippage a little bit last year, despite not playing. I mean, you look at their conference schedule; they gave up 24 points a game last year, and didn't play Florida State or Clemson. Now, they did play Tennessee and held them to 34 points, which may not seem like a they gave up 34 points. But yeah, holding that Tennessee team that scored 46 points a game to 34 is an accomplishment, in my opinion. Yeah. And they had a chance to win that football game. And I think it was 34. I think it was an overtime, wasn't it? Didn't that game go to overtime, or was that the year before?
I can't remember. I'm trying to remember.
But it was a competitive game that Pitt was in. That's the point, right? But so I see where you're coming from. And I, like I said, it's not so much that I'm pushing back on it, because I think you can make a case that a lot of these teams can be rearranged. There's a lot of closeness. What it comes down to for me is the home aspect of it, and the fact it's after a bye. Yeah, that was the thing that sort of tipped the scales for me as far as having Pitt third of these next 3 teams.
That's fair, because I think that both those things obviously played in Notre Dame's favor big time. The other thing that has me not worried, but just kind of like slightly just kind of interested is that even though you're coming off a bye, if Notre Dame's in a good situation coming into Pittsburgh, let's say you're undefeated or you have 1 loss, after Pitt, you're playing Clemson as the last of those pillar games, right? And I'm not going to say that they're going to overlook necessarily, but if you're Notre Dame and if you're one of their players, you're going to look at that and say, coming into that last 4-game stretch, if I am 0 losses or 1 loss, I got a chance to make a playoff run here, right, guys?
Right.
And that Clemson game, I think, is going to be highlighted so much at that point because those last 2 games against, well, it's Wake Forest and Stanford, the last 2. That should be easy sailing-ish, at least in quotations, right? So Clemson, that big game that's left on the schedule, I just think that there's some parts of like Pittsburgh as a tough kind of gritty team coming in with the last pillar game the week after. That one just has my attention a little bit.
You're
Not
worried about them
necessarily
overlooking
worried,
it. Just human nature,
just a
just
little
look.
bit.
But it's
Just a
not
little bit.
worried. It's just about what the criteria is that goes
I'm
into
interested.
where we place these teams, right? And that's a part of it. So that's a
I'm
really
just
good
really
point.
interested to see how well they get up for that type of
Yeah.
game with Clemson the next week as
Yep.
the last big one.
What you just said about that is why I have Louisville ahead of Pitt. Is part of the reason I have Louisville ahead of Pitt, Ryan, because that's next on the schedule. Number 6 is Pitt for me. Number 6 for me is Louisville. And the reason I have Louisville number 6, Ryan, is if I had to make a prediction, I would not be shocked if Pitt finishes ahead of Louisville in the standings because of the way that their schedules match up. But I think Louisville might be a tougher game because I worry about the looking ahead to USC the next week, right? You're coming off of a back-to-back tough games as well. That's also part of it. You've got, if you're able to survive the previous 2 games against Ohio State and at Duke, you're now coming to Louisville with USC on the line. I just kind of have that. Is this that stub your toe week? I would say of the teams that I have ranked in this group of 4 that we talk about, that they're pretty close together. Louisville's the one that I have the most questions about, though, Ryan. That's the one thing I will say is the placement of the game is a big reason why I have them ahead of Pitt.
Yep.
But I have the most questions about them. Obviously the transition to Jeff Brom's system. You lose your quarterback. You're getting a guy to play for you that's played in Jeff Brom's system, but he clearly wasn't overly effective at it, and that's partly why he transferred. Yeah. Right? And the talent on offense is good. It's not great. Your defense is relying on a lot of quality Power 5 transfers. That's another thing I like about Louisville is by game 6 or 7 for Louisville, all those transfers that are coming to help out the defense should be in a little bit more of a we know the system type of mentality. Yep. And they're going to be a quality team. I really think there's a stretch of 8 opponents, 8 teams right here that I think are all bowl teams. I think Wake Forest and above are all bowl teams. So that's where Louisville gets to me. Yeah, there's some players in the Jeff Brom system, but Notre Dame knows the Jeff Brom system. They've played it 2 of the last 3 years, right? Yep. They played against Purdue in 2020, right? 2021. No, they played it against it once. I keep thinking that the Jack Plummer they played against twice, but not Jeff Brom's system. They played against Jeff Brom, obviously coached against him 2 years ago. I thought the defense shut that system down because the biggest thing for me, Ryan, is if Notre Dame plays their game, Louisville can't beat Notre Dame because I think where Louisville's going to struggle is the same place Purdue struggled 2 years ago. They're not going to be able to play with Notre Dame in the trenches if Notre Dame plays their game. And that's a reason I thought about having them lower, but the placement is why I have them where I have them.
That's fair. I can definitely get the placement. I think Louisville is going to be an interesting team because I'm not really – I think you said the biggest question marks, right? Like, I don't know what to expect of that team 100% in year 1. They're a big unknown. I could see Jeff Brom working some magic, and it's like, oh, wow, the system works, right? Like, all of a sudden you're better. My hesitation is that they were actually a big defensive team last year. Like, they did some good things on the defensive side of the ball. You lost Yasir Abdullah. You lost Yaya Diaby as your 2 best pass rushers. Like, that's just where I'm, like, struggling with Louisville a little bit. But I wouldn't be shocked if we're looking down the line and it's like Louisville quietly went 8-4 in Jeff Brom's first year because they have a more competent offensive structure and they're able to get the most out of Jack Plummer. Like, they're one of those teams, honestly, for me, that was probably the hardest to put into a slot, Louisville, because there's some names there's a coach very well, but there's a lot of volatility to how good that team could be this year. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Louisville went 8-4, 9-3. I wouldn't be shocked if they went 6-6. I also wouldn't be shocked if they went 5-7 in a transitional year. Like, there's just a lot of different outcomes I think that could come with them.
Next on the list, Ryan, we had so you had Pitt's 5.
Yeah.
I had Pitt's 7. I
Yep.
had Louisville 6, you had Louisville 7. My number 5 team is your number 6 team. So again, really
Yep.
close. It's just a little bit of a flip. And that is NC State. I have NC State number 5. A couple of
Yep.
reasons why I have NC State over the other two teams. I have a lot more certainty about what NC State has at quarterback than those other two teams, which I think right now are big question marks. If I had to take one of those 3 kids right now to run my offense, it'd be Brennan Armstrong, because I don't worry about him being injured and injury prone. And is he a little bit punch drunk like Phil Dracovic after the beating he took the last 3 years? That's not a shot at Phil
Sure.
Dracovic. That happened to David Carr, right? Or Derek Carr. No, it's which one's the older one? Derek is the older one, right? Or David's the older one. David's
David's the one that went drafted by the Texans and got
correct. And
absolutely
he just got
destroyed.
his body
Yeah.
beat up and just mind beat up with playing for the Texans, those early Texans team under what was his name? Chris was their first head coach, the offensive guy, Chris goodness gracious.
I know you're talking about. It was
yeah, but
yeah.
Anyway, here's kind of some of the things for me, Ryan.
Yep.
Here's what puts, I'll be real simple. Here's what puts NC State ahead of all the others. Obviously, it's the road game, so that factors into the Pitt conversation. But when it comes down to it, it's simple. It's as simple as this: is I don't have a lot of faith in some of the circumstance of other teams. But the one thing I know, I don't have a lot of faith in Dave Doran. But the one thing I really like about these players, or about this team, I should say, is this is one of the best coordinator combinations that Notre Dame is going to face all year, in my opinion. And that's what I like about NC State. There are questions about the talent. Ryan, I know that you're going to talk about this. NC State lost some really good players on defense. They lost some pretty good players on offense. They're not a loaded roster, but Robert Anae and Tony Gibson, to me, is arguably the best coordinator combination Notre Dame is going to face all year. Now, if Ryan Day is still calling plays for Ohio State, I take that back, because Ryan Day is a good offensive coordinator. He's not necessarily, we don't know if he's a great head coach, but he's a great offensive coordinator. And then obviously Jim Knowles. But this combination, I really like Tony Gibson. That 3-3-5 defense is, how on sync will Notre Dame be by game 3? That's the placement part of it too, is, Notre Dame's learning a new offensive coordinators. Hartman's still learning new players. The offensive line is still trying to gel. And then now you've got to go face Tony Gibson's 3-3-5 defense, right? That's a concern for me. And then we've seen what Robert and I can do. He took a terrible Syracuse offense and pass offense and turned it around and made it pretty good up to Spencer Schrader getting hurt last year. And he did some great things at Virginia with that offense as well. He is one of the most underrated coordinators, and he's bringing in a quarterback that he just had 44 plus 100 yards with 2 years ago in that league. That's really what it comes down to. It's not the personnel as much as I have a lot of faith in those two coordinators, combined with it being early enough in the year to where I worry about, will the Notre Dame offense be clicking well enough by game 3? Because that was a concern we had about Notre Dame last year, was how we knew the O-line was going to be good. We just know when it was going to come together, right? And that hurt them the first couple games. And I have a little bit of a concern about that with the offense this year, Ryan, is I think the offense is going to be really good this year. I don't know that it's going to be week 1, right? Yep. And that's what we got to, when is it going to click? And the NC State game is early enough to where you get a little bit concerned about that. And then being on the road as well. So that's why I have NC State number 5. And honestly, Ryan, why I considered putting NC State ahead of Duke is simply because the earliness of it and the coordinator aspects. But I'll get into why I ended up going with Duke here in a minute. But that's why I have NC State number 5.
NC State's another weird team for me, because I agree. I think Robert Anae is going to be able to get the most out of Brennan Armstrong. He's also kind of in that Phil Dracovic area, though, where I'm just like, man, he was bad last year, right? And I know it wasn't all his fault, obviously, to the Tony Elliott effect, right, of playing down in Virginia. But man, what version are you exactly going to get from Brennan Armstrong, right? Or is he going to be the guy from 2 years ago?
Can I say this, Ryan? Can I interject this? Because
Sure.
To your point, we've seen 3 Brennan Armstrongs. We saw an okay Brennan Armstrong in 2020. We saw a really good Brennan Armstrong in 2021, and we saw a horrible Brennan Armstrong in 2022. Right? So we've actually seen, it's not even just 2-year difference of with an eye, without an eye. The first version of Virginia with Brennan Armstrong, with Robert and I, wasn't great either. No. And so that he like, to your point, that is a very different version. Like, I think I want to, the reason I want to interrupt you too, Ryan, is I want to actually put a number to it because it really is wild.
Yes.
In 2020, Brennan Armstrong in 9 games threw 2,117 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 11 picks. He averaged 235.2 rushing yards per game, ran for over 500 yards, and had 5 touchdowns, so 23 total touchdowns. In 2021, in 11 games, it's only 2 more games, he threw for 4,449 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 picks. He went from 235.2 passing yards a game to 404.5. He also rushed for 9 touchdowns and had 40 total touchdowns. Then you come into 2022, and in 10 games, he passed for 2,210 yards, only completed 54.6% of his throws, which was about an 11% dip from the year before. He passed for 58.6 in 20, 65.2 in 2021, and he averaged 221 yards per game. He had a grand total of 13 total touchdowns, 7 passing, 6 rushing, and 12 picks last season. So we've seen 3 distinctly different Brennan Armstrongs in his last 3 seasons. So how can you know what he's going to be this year, right?
Exactly.
That's the question.
Especially in a completely different situation now, where the one thing about Virginia, the year that he was good, Brennan Armstrong in 2021, is he had some pretty good wide receivers, right? Like
and tight ends
around him. Yeah, and tight ends. I mean, yeah, Jelani Woods. I completely forgot about Jelani Woods. I mean, yeah, he had some really good pass catchers just in general that year. NC State, they lost Thayer Thomas. I think Devin Carter is no longer on that team at wide receiver. So I just have some questions of what the skill position is around him. I think the offensive line is going to be pretty good, though, because they have their left tackle coming back. They have Dylan McMahon coming back on the interior offensive line. So I think that their offensive line is going to be able to protect Brennan Armstrong, which would be good. Defensively, I love Tony Gibson. I think that he is one of the best defensive coordinators in all of college football. I think he's an incredible defensive mind. But a lot of losses on that side of the ball, right? You still have Peyton Wilson back. You still have both corners, Shaheem Battle and Aiden White coming back. So it's not like it's bare, right? Like you still have a lot of good players. But the middle of that defense was kind of hit with a lot of losses this offseason. You lost Drake Thomas and Isaiah Moore at linebacker, who had played a lot of football. You lost Corey Durden at defensive tackle. You also lost Tanner Engel at safety, who were all very substantial producers for NC State. So I think you could still count on Tony Gibson getting the most out of that team, and I think that there still could be a good defense. But are they going to be quite as good as they have been over the last couple of years? That's kind of where I'm just kind of second guessing it a little bit. I think that NC State will still be a good football team, obviously. I had them at number 6. You had them at number 5. So it's not like there's a ton of difference. I actually do think, though, because it's weird, right? Dave Doran, I think that you can always pretty much know what type of team you're going to get, right? Like they're kind of like a Pittsburgh feel to it, where it's like they're just going to be a good, solid team. Are they going to be great? Maybe not. But are they going to be bad? Probably not, right? Like they're probably going to be at least be a good, solid football team. This is one of the more volatile teams that I can remember under Dave Doran over the last couple of years, because I look and I say defensive losses, wide receiver losses, and brand new offensive system and quarterback coming in. For all I know, NC State might be 9-3 or 10-2 this year, but also for all I know, they might be 7-5 and just a solid football team. You know, like there's just a little bit of volatility to how good NC State can be this year.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I just go back to the one thing that's not volatile. They have 2 very good coordinators. And if I had more faith in Dave Doran, because somebody on the board, we were talking about this, said, NC State's always a really well-coached team. And I was like, I don't agree with that. I think he's had some teams that have definitely underachieved during his tenure at NC State. I'm not a big Dave Doran fan.
Last year underachieved for sure.
Yeah, I'm much more high on their coordinators than I am Dave Doran. Like that Notre Dame team that NC State team that came to play Notre Dame in 2017, they shouldn't have got whooped like that by Notre Dame. Now with the talent they had.
The Hurricane
game? The
yeah.
2017 game is the one at home that Notre Dame beat them by 21, where they ran for over 300 yards against a D line that had 4 guys that got drafted in the 4th round or higher in the starting lineup. And
Bradley Chubb and all those dudes. Yeah,
exactly. And a starting Mike linebacker that's now starts for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Mike Pratt.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm really big fan of their coordinators, but we'll see if Dave Doran can get them ready to play. The other thing too that kind of, Ryan, to led me to thinking maybe dropping them a little bit is the fact that this is going to be game 2 for
Right.
them this season.
Yep.
And so how into that system will they be? So some of the concerns that I have about Notre Dame's offense early, you then have to say, but you got to look at it the other way around and say, how will that offense be ready for what's going to be, I think, a really good Notre Dame defense? That's the other part of it too, right? So whereas Notre Dame will have 2 games to get ready for NC State gets 1. They get UConn.
Right.
That's it. Because they start in week 1, Notre Dame starts in week 0. So that's the other factor that you could use to argue that NC State should be a little bit lower.
UConn's also not the just rollover that they were a couple years ago either. They're
Jim
getting
Moore's
better.
done a nice job there, man. He did a
Right.
really nice job there.
I watched a bunch of their tape this offseason, man. I'm like, they got some more talent than people kind of give
And
them
they're
credit
well
for.
coached.
Like,
He got them going quickly. He did a really nice job there.
So
We've
NC
had
State should beat them, but like, I don't think it's a rollover game. Is the point,
we had him on our show a few times before you came on, Ryan, talking about the draft and different guys from Notre Dame back after the 2020 season. So really nice guy. Like we talked a little bit afterwards. Really good dude. So I was glad to see him doing well at UConn. So you kind of expect the son of an NFL coach, and he's been in the spotlight, been at UCLA. You kind of expect him to kind of have this. I'm too cool for you. I'm just doing this as a favor to it. Yeah, and he wasn't like that at all. Really good guy. Really good guy. So I like Jim Moore. Really, glad that he's doing well. Really glad he's doing well. So let's get to our top 4, Ryan. And the next 4 we have in the same order. Number 4 is Duke. And I think there's a lot of things to factor into this one, Ryan. In a part of it, I'll let you kind of talk about the team, and I'll talk about the circumstance, right? A big reason why we have Duke here is the coaching and the talent, which Ryan will get into. But the other part of it is you can't dismiss the fact that it comes the week after Ohio State. And it's going to be one of 2 emotions that you worry about. The dejection of losing to Ohio State at home. How is this team going to respond to that? They didn't respond to it well last year. And then the second one is you beat Ohio State. And sort of that, hey, that euphoria that comes from that. Is there a letdown against a Duke team that maybe you don't respect, but you should? Right. And those are the 2. Either way, the placement of this game, being a road game a week after Ohio State, is a big thing. That's a tiebreaker over all the other team-related topics we could have. To me, that alone is why I would have them there. But Ryan, make no mistake, this isn't just a Duke football team that Mike Elko used his wizard magic to turn into a 9-4 football team last year. He did a phenomenal job coaching. There's no doubt.
Yep.
But this is a team that's got surprisingly good talent on both sides of the ball.
They do. I mean, if you're just talking about the NFL draft perspective for a second, because that's how we kind of coin talent sometimes, is Riley Leonard, I think, is going to be an NFL quarterback. I really like that kid. A dual threat kid, 6'4", 212 pounds. He can run. He can throw. I really like Riley Leonard.
You started you started talking to me about him before I had even seen him play yet.
Yeah, I saw him in the first game against somebody bad last year. But I'm like,
you were like, dude,
man.
this kid can play. Like Ryan jumped on that bandwagon quick, y'all. Like real fast. And he was like, you got to watch this kid. And so I checked him out and I was like, yeah, this kid can play, right? So I just want to make sure that people understand this. Ryan saw that from Riley Leonard like week 1 and 2 with that kid.
I don't even remember who they were playing, man. It was someone not good, but I mean, he just was like, oh, that kid can play a little bit, man. Like he's pretty talented because he also has a real good offensive line coming back. Graham Barton coming back.
It was the Temple game.
Yes. Yeah. It was the Temple game. Yeah. Graham Barton coming back at left tackle. Jacob Monk coming back at guard. They're both all ACC caliber football players. They all were all ACC last season. He also has 3 returning wide receivers that are all very talented in their own rights, kind of bring different styles to the game. And defensively, Mike Elko for one, which is great, right? As a defensive mind. And then also he's got Dwayne Carter coming back. He's got Jamion Franklin coming back. He's got RJ Oben coming back, whose father played in the NFL, Roman Oben. So that defensive front is surprisingly good for Duke, right? So they have a good defensive line. They have a good offensive line. They have some receivers coming back, and they have a playmaker at quarterback, and I think they're well coached. So a 9-4 team last year, I think has a chance to be a 10-plus win team this year in the ACC. I really think Duke takes a step forward this year, even more than last year. They're still kind of a younger team as far as grades perspective, but they got a lot of really nice experience last year, which I think is big time. So I expect them to be a really tough out this year for everyone, not just Notre Dame.
And you look at it, I like the skill on the perimeter, and I think they've got a D-line that can give Notre Dame problems, and they got a mobile quarterback. Those are like 3 recipes to a potential upset, Ryan. You gotta have an offense that can score, but you have to have a defense that can make stops, and
Yes.
they have a shot to have both of those. Now,
Yep.
what kind of jump look, Duke's not sneaking up on anybody this year, right? That's
No.
the other thing, and so we're gonna find out what kind of team that Duke is gonna have this season from that regard, but they got a lot of good players coming back, Ryan. And like I said, I loved the job that he did. Now here's an interesting question about this game too is Duke is going to play Clemson in the opener, and then they play at UConn the week before. So Notre Dame's going to have 2 games against 2 straight ACC games against teams coming off of road games at UConn.
Yep.
So there'll be a little bit of
It's
that. Okay,
weird.
we know what UConn is. How does
Yep.
this team kind of stack up in those type of things? So it's going to be interesting, but I really like the placement of this team. I like Riley Leonard. Somebody just asked if Riley Leonard is a dual threat quarterback. Yes, he is.
He
He
led
is
them in
definitely
rushing last year. He had like
yes.
700 yards or something.
Yes, 699 yards and 13 rushing touchdowns,
Yeah.
5.6 per carry, on top of throwing for 2,967 yards and 20 touchdowns,
Yes.
and only 6 picks. So yeah, this is a good football player, and so they have all the sort of the making of. They've got all the ingredients to a potential upset team that makes you a little bit nervous. Now, again, is this a game Notre Dame should win? Yes, but it's one of those games where if you don't bring it, if you don't at least bring your B+ game against Duke, you could get yourself beat in that type of game. So that's why Duke is there at number 4 for me. And the gap between 3 and 4 isn't as great as some people might think, but there's a gap. The top 3 teams are certainly the clearly the top 3 teams, but Duke, it's not like those 3 and then like how Brian Kelly's schedule used to be. There'd be like 1 or 2 really good teams, and then there's like this huge drop off to number 3, 4, and 5, and then there's a huge drop off between 6 and 12 because the schedules in recent years are pretty weak. This isn't that. This is 7 to 8 teams that are really quality football teams to some degree, and Duke to me is at the tops of all those. It's that combination of quarterback play, talent coming back. Graham Barton, as you mentioned, is a guy that's considered one of the 3 or 4 best offensive tackles in football. So they got a quarterback that can play. They got receivers that can play. The kid he beat out at quarterback last year, moved to receiver, had a good first year, but he's in year 2 of playing receiver now. He's going to be better. I remember watching their spring game thinking these cats have some athletes on the perimeter for this kid to throw to. And so you look at that. I always want to say Jalen Catalon, the kid that's at Texas now, the safety, but it's Jalen Calhoun. He's a good football player. So their top 3 pass catchers all come back. So I really like what Duke is doing. And they've got 2 quality players up front on the defensive line. Dwayne Carter, obviously, is a really good defensive tackle. And then a guy that we all know, Jamion Franklin, comes back for a 6th season for Duke. And he had a really quality year last year as a nose tackle for Duke last year, Ryan.
Solid football player.
Yeah, really and did it while going through a lot of. He had 3 sacks last year, 3.5 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups, 26 tackles as part of that interior defensive line. He could have helped Notre Dame last year, that's for sure. But and great kid, and did it while his mom was going through cancer, right? So he's playing through that adversity. Really love that kid. Just and this is a good and Ryan. Everybody knows my respect for Mike Elko. I mean, he is a heck of a football coach, in my opinion. So this is going to be a challenging game.
I just wouldn't be shocked if Duke beats Clemson the first game of the season. I would not be shocked at all. Just leave it at that for now.
If it was honestly, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting. There's no doubt about it. It might be one of our predictions. Now that you say that, it might be one of the games I predict for us to do going into the week 1.
Upset alert. Let's go.
Number 3, Ryan, you and I have the same next 3 as well. Number 3 is USC. I will say this: there's one factor that made me want to consider moving this game up to number 2, and that is the week of USC is midterms for Notre Dame. Now, here's the reason why I chose not to. It goes back to the makeup of this football team. Notre Dame has a lot of starters that don't have to worry about midterms that week because they're graduated. If you look at it, I think Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Javante Jean-Baptiste, Nana, all your linebackers, Cam Hart, Xavier Watts, DJ Brown, I believe Ramon Henderson also just graduated. They have a lot of kids that's not an issue. Sam Hartman. Now, offensively, you've got some younger players that you've got to worry about that, right? especially your offensive line. Your tackles are going to be taking classes. Your guards are going to be taking classes. A lot of your receivers. But on defense, especially, which is the side of the ball that could most be affected by the midterm week, there's a lot of kids on that defense that don't have to worry about that, Ryan.
Sure.
And that can't be dismissed for me either. So I did the research on that, and that is midterm week for Notre Dame, and I don't understand why they don't do something about that schedule wise, but whatever. But once I saw that it was, and I started thinking about the roster and thinking about the defense, it doesn't move the needle as much for me. I have USC 3, number 1. They're very talented. It's a very good football team. Caleb Williams is the best football player Notre Dame will probably face all season, with all due respect to Marvin Harrison Jr. I still think Caleb Harrison, just the nature of being a quarterback and he touches the ball every single play is kind of where I'm coming from. That's a big factor. He's going to have talent around him. I'll say this, Ryan, for all the talk about all the transfers USC got in, I don't think this is as talented of a football team on offense as it was a year ago. With all due respect to Marshawn Lattimore, he's a good running back. He's not as good as Tyson. Marshawn Lloyd. What did I say? Latimer? Yeah.
Marshawn Lattimore.
He's pretty good.
Player.
He's a really good freaking football player. Marshawn Lloyd, he's not as good as Travis Dye. They're both good backs. Dorian Singer's a nice football player. He's not as good as Jordan Addison.
Sure.
I think losing Kyle Ford to UCLA is going to be a loss. Now, Taj Washington's a good football player, and they've got some Brendan Rice is a good football player. But I thought Kyle Ford was a quality football player for them last year. I don't think their offensive line is probably more talented, but it's because it's a bunch of new guys.
Yeah.
And, the one thing you say about last year's group, Andrew Voorhees was an overrated guy in a lot of ways, but he was a sixth-year senior that knew how to play the game. Same thing with the guard. I mean, they had a very veteran group. I think their defense is going to be a little bit more talented, just pure athleticism. But are any of those D linemen going to be as good as the kid they had that had 16 sacks last year?
Tuiapoto or
yeah. So I don't actually think this is going to be as talented of a team as it was last year. And having said that, it's still Lincoln Riley, it's still Caleb Williams. And being not as talented as last year doesn't mean they're still not really talented. They are. It's just I don't think they're quite on par with that last year. And I felt last year Notre Dame played with them. USC was clearly the better team in that game last year, but Notre Dame played with them and did so without Cam Hart, without Tariq Bracy, without their starting quarterback. And I look at that game, Ryan. I'm like, good Lord. I mean, Drew Pine, I love Drew Pine, and I was so bummed to hear about his hamstring. Did you hear about that?
No.
Reports are he might have tore his hamstring in camp, which really sucks because I love the kid. But Drew Pine
Rashada's going to play if he doesn't play.
Maybe. Wow. Drew Pine went 23 of 26 for 318 yards. Now I know this isn't always a direct correlation, but I start thinking about what's Sam Hartman going to do in that offense? Right. Against that defense. But it's at home. Just the matchup to me compared to the other two teams, you can make a case for USC being higher because of Caleb Williams, Ryan, but I'm comfortable with them being 3 at this point.
Well, I am as well, because I think that the things you have an advantage, obviously it's a game at home, and then also you have the bye week right after it. So we always talk about the bye week coming after, but when there's a bye week we're coming after, if I'm a team, I'm like, I can pull out all the stops here today, right, folks? Let's leave everything on the line because we have an extra week to get our bodies back, which I think is going to be big time for them. And let's be honest about this, right? Same defensive coordinator coming back for Notre Dame and Al Golden. A lot of the same defenders coming back. They had to have been embarrassed by the game last year, Brian, of how many sacks they missed against Caleb Williams, how they handled that game in general, getting run all over by Austin Jones last year.
Ryan, Marcus Freeman said that to me in our summer interview. You could tell he was not happy with how that game went. He talked about how we went away from what was working for us, and you could just tell, you could see it in his face, just the disgust. And if Al Golden is who I think he is, he's not going to be feeling really good about that game either.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I mean, because like I said, there's a lot of defensive players that did play in that football game, right? That are coming back. The linebackers, corner, a couple defensive linemen. Caleb Williams, because I know, first and foremost, I have to think the linebackers and the defensive linemen feel just distaste in their mouth with how they performed in the run game.
He made them look silly. scrambling around, but they
Oh
also,
yeah,
to your point, Ryan, also gave up like 180 yards rushing to Austin Jones.
exactly. I think the just demoralization of getting run on like that, on top of how many sacks should you have had against Caleb Williams last year? How many times was he gripped up, and all of a sudden he just makes magic happen and he's able to convert a third down and long, and it was just a frustrating game for the Notre Dame defense against USC last year. I think if this is a team that can potentially contend for a playoff spot, they're going to come in that USC game angry. Like, that's just how I think
Yeah.
that this is going to happen. I
I
think they're going to
hope.
play angry,
I hope.
and I think Notre Dame's offense is going to be able to move the ball on USC's defense. So
Yeah.
I think it's a payback game. I really do.
If they don't come in with that attitude, Ryan, it's going to tell us a lot about this football team, and not in a good way, because this is
Definitely.
exactly what we said about Ohio State last year about Michigan. Like,
Yep.
like they taunted you. You were born on third base and you thought that you hit a triple, just taunting your head coach, taunting your football team. It's been X number of days since Ohio State's beat Michigan because Michigan ducked out of the game the year before. So they acted as if it was like 2 years since they won the game. You're like, y'all didn't play last year. You guys quit that
Right.
game. You know what I mean?
Right.
But didn't stop them from running their mouths because Michigan hadn't, it had been 15 years since Michigan had anything to brag about when it comes to Ohio State, right? So they just acted a fool, and you're thinking, man, Ohio State is going to bring it against Michigan last year. And they didn't. First series was good. Went down the field and scored. But after that, it's like, where's the fire? So we hope that Notre Dame is going to be that team, right? And you're right, they should be. We're going to find out if they are. And that's going to be the big question.
Yeah.
But it's going to be you get them at home. And then the other part of it too is Notre Dame's going to be battle tested in that game. And battle tested can mean one of two things. One is your battle test is the positive. It's like, look, we've been through this. USC's got great receivers, but 3 weeks ago we were playing Ohio State's group. We played Duke's group. We just got done playing Jeff Brom's complicated pass offense the week before USC. So yeah, you had to see all that. And then you look at the other side of it. Battle tested can also mean we're tired. We're worn down. Like we've been in some major we've had to play at NC State. We've had to play Ohio State. We've had to play at Duke. We've had to play at Louisville. We just had 2 back-to-back road games for the USC game, whereas USC is playing Arizona at home the week before. They play at Colorado before that, at Arizona State the week before that, bye week, and then their first 3 games are San Jose State, Nevada, and Stanford. They could be fresher. There's all types of different ways to look at it, and we're going to find that out. We're going to find what this football team is made of. There's no doubt about it.
And if they are going to be a playoff team, if they're going to be a team that considerably contend for a championship, I think a big indicator will be, well, one, they would have to have a good record going into the to the USC game, right? Because it's a little bit later in the year. But Brian, for me, if they're a team that can legitimately contend this year, then they'll come into that game angry. They will, and I think that will be a big indicator of how good Notre Dame potentially could be the USC game, because that's one of the big blemishes on your schedule right now, man, is that you haven't beat Ohio State in my lifetime, and you got embarrassed defensively last year against USC. You need to be able to do that, man. So I'm excited for that game because I think that Notre Dame has a chance to show how proud they are potentially.
Yeah. Yep. Do you get back control of that series after USC?
Yes.
Because you dominated that series for the most part. So stubbed your toe in 2011, got your butts whooped in 2014 and 16. Yep. But after that 2016 loss, Notre Dame's pretty much controlled that series. They won in 17, won in 18. Actually, I think they'd won, 4 straight because they didn't play in 2020 because of COVID. Notre Dame didn't even play that well the year before and still beat USC convincingly, 31 to 16, 31 to 16. The 2019 game at home that Notre Dame won 30 to 27. That was a game where USC scored late. If you remember, Notre Dame had a big halftime lead in that game. The 2018 game was a very hard fought game out in LA, but Notre Dame had won 4 straight, including a 49-14 beatdown in 2017. So you had controlled that series, and then USC came out. And again, we've said this, Notre Dame had a couple series where they had a chance. If they do this, if they do that, it's a different ball game. But the reality is they didn't do those things. And USC did those things. When Notre Dame fumbled when it was 17-6, that game's not over basically at that point in time if USC then doesn't counter by going down and scoring a touchdown, right? Like, so USC did what they needed to do. Well, if Drew Pine doesn't throw a pick here, but he did, and USC countered by going down and scoring a touchdown. So it's not like that Notre Dame just gave the game away. USC won the game. Notre Dame didn't make the plays they needed to do to stay in it, and USC did. And sometimes we overlook the fact that, well, you know, Caleb Williams did some Superman stuff in that game. He did, but so did Austin Jones, who ran all over Notre Dame in that game. So those are the different things you look at and say, this is going to be a battle, but it's still, for me, number 3 on this list. Number 2 is Clemson. This is the one that's probably going to have the most disagreement from fans.
Yeah.
The reality is a lot of fans are looking at last year's game and just saying, hey, they dominated them last year. They had all those first-round picks.
We own them.
It's over. Yeah. And I just want to remind people that Notre Dame played Stanford at Stanford in 2021, beat them 45-14. A year later, at home, loses to a Stanford team that had not beaten a Power 5 team in over a calendar year. Right? So just because you did whatever you did last year doesn't mean that that's what you're going to do this year, number 1. Number 2, it's on the road. Number 3, we can't dismiss how bad I keep wanting to say Brandon Stokely. It's not Brandon Stokely. It's what was the kid's name? He played receiver there. He was the OC last year.
Oh, Streeter. Brandon
Streeter. I don't know why I keep wanting to say Brandon Stokely.
Brandon Stokely.
Nice. Brandon Streeter was not a very good offensive coordinator. And DJ Uiagalelei was just a bad fit for that offense, and it just was in his head at that point in time. Now, Notre Dame played great that game. They did, on defense and on special teams. But let's not forget, Notre Dame had 2 scoring drives on offense, 2 legit scoring drives on offense. That's it. They had a punt block for a touchdown. They had a pick 6 for a touchdown, and they had another touchdown set up by Notre Dame intercepting a pass at the 12-yard line. Folks, you can't count on that happening again this year. You just can't. Well, we're going to get another blocked punt for a score, and we're going to get another pick. No, that doesn't happen. You're going to have to earn it a whole lot more than you earned it last year in all phases of the game. You're not going to go to Clemson and beat them throwing for 85 yards. You're not going to run for almost 300 yards again on them. You're just not going to do it, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean Notre Dame can't or shouldn't win this game. I just think this is going to be a different Clemson team. We talk a lot about the quarterback situation, Ryan. It's a road game. Yep. I think Caden Klubnik is going to be much better this year in year 2. Plus, this is going to be in a November game, so he's going to have a bunch of starts under his belt to kind of work out some of the jitters. If they were playing like Clemson in week 3, I would probably have Clemson lower on this list, Ryan, to be completely honest with you. They're still going to be learning the system. Klubnik's like 4th career start, right? But it's later in the year. He's going to have a double digits in career starts under his belt because he also started the bowl game. He's going to be ready to go. I like the talent around him. Here's the other thing that I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are losing sight of. This might be the best offensive line Clemson has had in years. Could be. Yeah. It has a chance to be. They returned some really good talent. They had a true freshman, Blake Miller's a really physical football player that's going to be better in year 2. I like to make Will Putnam's a quality center. Walker Parks is a quality player. I'm not saying it's going to be an elite offensive line, but for Clemson, it's going to be one of the best they've had. They've had a lot of just really solid, do-your-job lines. This actually has some ability in it, in my opinion, Ryan, and that factors into why I really like this Clemson team this year. Yes, they lost some players on their front 7, but Ryan, as you're about to point out, Clemson's not hurting for defensive linemen on their returning team. As long as, here's the key, Xavier Thomas has to do something he has not done since his freshman year. He's going to have to stay healthy.
Yeah. Oh man, this is what recruiting brings you, right? Is that you can lose a Miles Murphy and a Brian Brissy up front and still bring back Tyler Davis and Ruka Rororo and all those types of guys, right? And they also bring in Peter Woods as a true freshman that apparently is looking really good for them as well.
Vic Burley they got as a true freshman who's also a really good football player. So they signed 3 defensive linemen, Ryan, that I think have a chance to be really good football players for them.
I think you could say that Vic Burley's a burly young man. Am I right?
Yes.
I mean,
he actually is.
He's a big guy.
He's like 6'3", 6'4", 275. Peter Woods is a kid from Alabama that's a really good football player. I mean, those are those freshmen, Ryan, that come in with the size to play now. You know, we just talked about Vic Burley, who was listed at 6'4", 275. Peter Woods is listed at like 6'2", 270, something like that, right? He's a good football player. They got Tamorian Parker, another kid from Alabama that I I didn't have in my top 100 postseason top 100, which I never still posted, but he was in my top 100 preseason ranking before his senior year. He's a good football player. So they landed, and they landed a kid, Stephylan Green, who Notre Dame looked at. It's not a good interior player. Yeah. They landed that defensive lineman whose name I cannot pronounce, last name I cannot pronounce, from DC. He's a good football player. So they needed a restocking of their offensive line. But here's the thing, Ryan, none of those freshmen have to come in and start. They're just depth guys, right? It's like they're just going to be depth players unless they beat somebody out. Because like you said, Tyler Davis is back. Rook Ororo is back. Justin Maskell's back. That kid's played a lot of football at Clemson. And Xavier Thomas is back, right? And although I would argue their linebacking core individually as individual players, they might be a little overrated as individual players. Mainly I'm looking at Jeremiah Trotter Jr. As a unit. They're very good as a unit, though. Yeah. That's the thing, is if you take away the hype about Trotter individually, he's still a good college football player. And Barrett Carter, I know, is a guy that you love, Ryan. And then Keith McGuire's a good player coming off the bench. They have good depth there. So Clemson's front seven is still going to be very formidable, which is something when you're playing on the road can be a bad, a recipe for disaster.
And kind of what I said with the USC game for Notre Dame's favor of like coming in angry. Clemson's got to come in angry in this game, right? Of like, hey, man, we're at home now. And Clemson has a really nice home field, obviously, right? Like they get pumped up, they get juiced, and they got embarrassed last year playing against Notre Dame.
They have a great home crowd.
Want some payback? Yeah, great home crowd.
Especially against good teams. Great home crowd. They really do.
I think the defense is going to be quietly. They're always a good defense, but like I think that defensive back wise, I think they're actually going to be a little bit better in year two of Andrew Makuba as a main starter. In year two of their corner, that's name's escaped. Nate Wiggins is actually a good player. He was just on a not great unit last year. Yeah. So I think that their defensive back is going to be a little bit better. Yes.
That's if Notre Dame's going to win this game, which they can beat every team on their schedule.
Oh yeah.
If Notre Dame's going to win this game, that's still the matchup that I like.
Yes.
I think that's the part of Clemson that's getting the most overhyped is the secondary. Yep. Because they had good numbers last year because they didn't play very good teams. But that was the thing we thought going into that game where Notre Dame could take advantage, was throwing the football on them. Sam Hartman torched that secondary last year.
Yeah.
Torched them. He's going to have a better run game, better defense. But people in there, it's like in the chat, we're already seeing it. It's just, Clemson's this. Guys, Clemson had a disappointing 11-3 season last year.
Won 11 games. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is a good football team. And to me, when you play them on the road in November, after you've already played 9 hard-fought battles, this is not a gimme game. It's going to be a tough game. And the other part of it is I think there's some people that are overhyping him a little bit too much because of the Garrett Riley thing. It's not so much that I think Garrett Riley is a great coordinator. I don't know that we know that yet.
But he's better than Brandon Streeter.
But he's also that system is a perfect fit for Cade Klubnik. He doesn't have to be an elite offensive coordinator. Just go do your thing and let that kid work. And the key for their offense is going to be their young receivers have got to step up. That's going to be the key.
It's always the middle ground with those types of conversations, right, Brian? Either Garrett Riley is the greatest offensive coordinator ever, or it's not going to be that great, right? I'm in the middle. I'm like, hey, it's better than it was last year without question, but I still need to see more from Garrett Riley because let's not act like he wasn't with Sonny Dykes, who's also a very good offensive mind.
Great offensive mind.
Yes.
Right.
So him by himself.
Sonny Dykes' success on offense, Ryan, didn't start when Garrett Riley showed up.
Exactly. Yeah. Like literally, but that's Jared Goff
but that's a benefit for Garrett Riley. He learned under that. That's the point.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep. So I think Clemson is going to be an improved offensive team. Like you said, wide receivers need to step up, but you still have Will Shipley coming back. It should be a good offensive line for Clemson standards. And the defense is always going to be good, guys. And at the end of the day, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, Clemson's going to play with a chip on their shoulder in that football game. The last time they played in Notre Dame, they lost 35-14 and got embarrassed on national television. That matters. So I think Clemson's going to be ready to play in that one.
Here's what's working in Notre Dame's favor. They have played 3 times in the regular season the last 10 years. Notre Dame is 2-1 in those games. And the only loss was at Clemson by 2 points where they had a chance to tie the game at the end. And Notre Dame didn't even play that well in that game against a Clemson team that went on to play for a championship. I don't think this is a vintage Clemson football team. It's not. but it's going to be a very, very tough game. And here's the other part of it too. We can say whatever we want as Notre Dame fans about how we beat them last year and this, that, and the other. But what Notre Dame has not proven under Brian Kelly or Marcus Freeman is they can go on the road and win these games. Coach Freeman showed last year that he can win this kind of game at home. No question. We saw that. It's part of the reason I have USC ranked below Clemson. What we don't know yet, Ryan, is if they go on the road and win this kind of game because, with all due respect, North Carolina ain't Clemson. With all due respect, right? This is a different animal. And last year, Notre Dame played 2 legit top 10 teams on the road, and they both lost both of them by 11. Now, were they competitive in those games? Yes, they were. Neither team whooped Notre Dame, but Notre Dame was, even especially USC, USC was clearly the better team that entire game. Notre Dame was went toe-to-toe with Ohio State until the fourth quarter. Right? Where with USC was always like, you're playing catch-up. Like, okay, this is going to be a rough day. And you'd make a play here, make a play there to kind of get yourself back in it. But as we've said before, USC was the better team that day.
Yes, they were.
They just were. So that's where Clemson's there. Number 1, Ryan, number 1 team.
Yep.
It's Ohio State. And I think you could make an argument for – I'm going to say this. Ohio State has enough big question marks for me that you could make a case for me that Ohio State, just without context, it might not be the toughest game on their schedule. You could make a case for Clemson and USC both being ahead of Ohio State. Just looking at the roster, looking at the matchups, looking at where the game is played, and then especially looking at the quarterback position, in my opinion. Right? The offensive line position. I think Ohio State, of the 3 teams, has the 3rd best offensive line of the big 3. Their quarterback situation is 3rd best of the big 3. You get them at home. But here's why Ohio State is number 1 for me. And it's real simple. This is a team that Notre Dame has not shown me that they can beat yet. Simple as that. And they have a defensive line. Of the 3 we talked about, they have the best talent on the defensive line. And they're the defensive line that whooped Notre Dame's butt last year. Right? You want to know why I have Ohio State ahead of Clemson? Because I watched that Clemson off defensive line with 2 first-round draft picks get worked by Notre Dame. And I watched that same offensive line get their butts whooped by Ohio State. Now, you could say, look, game 1 versus game 10, very fair. Or game 9, very fair. Very fair. But it's still the reality. Ryan, you know me. I don't just dismiss September games because they're early. I don't. Now, should Notre Dame's offensive line play better? Yeah, they should. Should Notre Dame do this, do that better against Ohio State? Yes, absolutely. But they have to show it. Notre Dame showed me they can beat USC at home. Even good USC teams. This USC team should be pretty good this year, Ryan. Are they really that much better than 2017 USC? I don't think so. Probably, maybe better. But Notre Dame beat that USC team by 35. They've shown they can beat Clemson. They have not shown that they can beat Ohio State. It really is that simple for me. And that's why Ohio State is number 1, because sometimes, right, it's a mental thing. You know, like, look, we have faith we can beat this team. Do you have faith you can beat that team? I don't know. I hope we see a really, really, really hungry football team for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame's hungry and executes, I think they can and should beat Ohio State. But until they show me that they can beat an Ohio State, because what's the 4 big programs the last decade? Well, who's the big 4 right now? It's Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Georgia. Yep. Of those 4 teams, Notre Dame has shown they can beat one of them. The other 3, they're 0 against. And they've had chances. Had a chance against Ohio State in 2015. They had a chance against Ohio State last year. They had 2 shots against Georgia in their time frame. They've had 2 shots against Alabama, and they haven't won any of them. And your claim to fame is, but we only lost by 11 to Ohio State.
Right.
Okay. Then show me you can beat them, and then we can talk about how you should be ahead of them. But that's why the Buckeyes are number 1 for me, Ryan. It really is that simple.
I mean, because because we could talk about the defensive line for Ohio State, right? You could talk about all the guys they returned, JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Michael Hall and Tyreek Williams. And, they obviously have a lot of good guys coming back. Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers. The defense should be better in year 2, I believe, under their defense coordinator. I think that they're going to be much better. And I think their offense, like, again, whether Ryan Day's calling it or not, they've shown that they have a track record of developing pretty good offense, right? So I think Ohio State's going to be a good football team. At the end of the day, Brian, I really do think it comes down to that simple. Notre Dame has not beaten Ohio State in my lifetime. That's a fact, right? And whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not, in the back of some of the Notre Dame's players' minds, they're thinking, can we beat Ohio State? Can we actually beat them? Like, yes, you believe every Saturday you can go on the field and beat anybody, sure. But until you actually do it, there's no proof that you could do it. So like there's no proof. Clemson, Notre Dame has proven, to your point, that they could do it. They've proven that they could beat USC. What proof do they have that they can beat Ohio State this season? They have no proof of it. Which again, that can fuel them, or that can leave a little bit of a defeatist attitude in the back of your mind when things are going wrong, and maybe it comes down to a one-score game at the end of the game. Like, can I really do this right now? Can we do it? Like, I'm not sure. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, about Ohio State, which is
so they got to prove it. They got to prove it. Now, people on here talking in response, oh, but Notre Dame's better than Clemson. They're better than. Don't disagree. I think Notre Dame's roster top to bottom is better than Clemson's roster top to bottom. But we didn't say that Notre Dame's not better than Clemson. We said Clemson is the second toughest team on the schedule. And with all due respect, as much as I love what Notre Dame did to Clemson last year, it was one Saturday. We pointed this out before, right? In 2017, Auburn beat Georgia 40-17, crushed them. 3 weeks later, they played in the ACC title game, and Georgia beat them 28-7. What you did in one game does not mean that that's just the new norm, that Notre Dame's going to blow out Clemson every time they play. Can Notre Dame win that game? Of course. Notre Dame can beat every team on their schedule next year.
Agreed.
They can. But there's still some teams they've got to prove they can go on the road and beat a team like Clemson. They haven't done that. Last time they beat a team like that on the road, in my opinion, was all the way back in 2013 when they beat Oklahoma. Last time they did, or 2012, when they beat Oklahoma. It's over a decade ago now. Right. And obviously beating Ohio State, something I haven't seen in my lifetime. I haven't played a lot of games. I think Notre Dame and Ohio State have played 5 times in my lifetime, twice in the 90s, the 05 Fiesta Bowl, the 2015 Fiesta Bowl, and then last year.
Yeah.
So it's only 5 times, but it's still 0 for 5.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so until they prove that they can beat a team like that, to me, you have to be able to take that into context. Now, at the same time, I have in my season prediction, I will predict Notre Dame beat Ohio State because it's what they should do. But make no mistake, it's not going to be easy. Because the other thing we do sometimes when we talk down opponents is you then take away the importance of what a win would mean. If Notre Dame goes on the road and beats Clemson, that's a huge win. But if you just spend your whole time convincing yourself that Clemson's not that good, guess what? Then you're not going to realize how important that win is. And that's the other part of this whole conversation as well for me, Ryan. So what's your biggest trap game, Ryan? I think we have the same one. What are your 2 biggest trap games for me? And that's how we're going to kind of conclude because we just kind of said one of the things I was going to talk about, Ryan, is what is the most needle moving game for Notre Dame this year? And I think we just said it. It's Ohio State, right? Yes. I mean, that's for a host of reasons.
Yeah.
What are the 2 biggest trap games for you? The games that maybe concern you the most of teams that Notre Dame is better than, but you're most concerned about them potentially losing those particular games.
I mean, Duke's number 1 and has been for a little while. We've talked about this a ton, but Duke, the week right after Ohio State, like I just don't love that, because to your point, Brian, it's like 2 things could happen. Either you can have a hangover from having a huge victory against Ohio State, right? You can have a huge victory against Ohio State and you come out a little bit flat, or you can get a little bit ahead of yourself and really start to kind of look forward to like, hey man, we beat one of the big 3. Now we need to take down 1 to 2 more of them and we're in the playoffs, right? Like that's kind of where we are as far as Duke and the recipe that I think Duke brings to the table, I think is a troubling one for Notre Dame. You talk about the offensive line for Duke being one of the better ones on the schedule. Talk about the defensive line being a really good defensive line. Wide receivers coming back, but Riley Leonard at quarterback worries me, man. It does. I mean, that one really, really worries me. I think that one is a little bit of a trap game. And the other one is Pitt, which is why I had Pitt at number 5. And I know we disagree on that one a little bit, but the fact that it's sandwiched in between 2 of your biggest games of the season. And I know that there was a bye week in between Southern Cal and Pittsburgh, but we know that the long-term effects of whether you beat Southern Cal or you lose to Southern Cal, that can still have a couple weeks of kind of like a realization of who you are as a football team. And then you play Pitt, and then you're going to go on the road the very next week to play Clemson. So I think Pitt is going to be a sneaky game in between two very important ones, although after a bye week. But I think that it starts with Duke for me, Brian. That's the game that I look at and I say, week after Ohio State, Duke is a team that can kind of sneak up on you a little bit. They have the dual threat aspect, the quarterback. They're good on all of the lines, on offense and defense. Duke worries me a little bit.
What's your in your number 2? You said is Pitt, right?
Pitt's my other one. Yeah.
My two are back to back. It's Duke and Louisville. Because let's just say hypothetically, you get past Ohio State and Duke, and you got USC coming down in 2 weeks. I think this Louisville team's going to have a couple losses at that point in time, Ryan, because again, they are a team that's at least a couple losses. They play Georgia Tech in Atlanta. It's not a gimme. They play at NC State. That I think the game they're going to lose. They play Indiana in Lucas Oil. I mean, they should win, but who knows? They play Boston College at home. There's a chance they could have a couple losses. They're at least going to be coming off, in my opinion, a loss the week before at NC State. I think they're at least going to be coming off of a loss then. You just had 2 huge wins over Ohio State and Duke in this context. And then you got USC coming up. I could see this being a trap game for me. Pitt, I agree, but because I have Louisville higher, it's not sandwiched. Like Pitt is technically sandwiched between those two teams, but you do have a bye week.
You have the bye week, yeah. Yep.
After USC. Whereas Louisville's like right in between a road game at Duke and a home game against USC. And so that's why, I kind of have Louisville as my other one. Some people have said NC State. I don't view NC State as a trap game. The way I define trap game. Now, can NC State beat you? Yeah, sure. But a team that can beat you is not a trap game. A trap game is more of the circumstance causes you to maybe overlook or not be as prepared for that moment.
You a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. NC State's not going to sneak up to you. Notre Dame's going to be looking forward to that game for the first 3 weeks of the season because you're playing Navy and Tennessee State the first 2. You should win those games convincingly. NC State's the first real test if you're Notre Dame. I agree.
Those are my two trap games, Ryan. It's going to be fun to watch them go through the schedule. There's no doubt. So I'm looking forward to it. Here's the thing we will say is if Notre Dame is a playoff team this year, we know they will have earned it. There's no doubt. This is going to be a challenging schedule. I think a lot of fans are sleeping over how challenging it's going to be because some of the tough games are not perennial big names. I still don't think there's a lot of Notre Dame fans understand just the talent that Duke is going to have coming back. The other thing is that is funny is when you talk about how good a team is, people have this reaction like, well, Notre Dame, we've said this before. Somebody in the chat literally said this. Stop talking about how good Marshall is. Notre Dame had no excuse losing to Marshall. We've literally said that a 1,000 times.
Who said they shouldn't have?
You can say no. I literally say this every time that Notre Dame has. We talk about Marshall, and yet it's like people just tune out the second half. Marshall's a good football team last year. They won 9 games. That's a good football team. Notre Dame had no business losing that game. Literally what we say every single time. And so I think that sometimes when you don't give an opponent enough credit, you don't appreciate the quality of the win. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
So, but here's another thing. Somebody's pushing back on our Clemson height. He says I don't understand why grown-ups put LOL and stuff like that in the middle of a debate or discussion. It's I just can't stand that. But you said Clemson is going to be good, but I just don't see Cade Klubnik outplaying Sam Hartman, who lit up Clemson for 50 points last year. Those two things have nothing to do with each other. Nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
I mean, Notre Dame beat Clemson last year, but Clemson still won 11 games, so they were still a good football team regardless.
You can say Clemson. Yeah. Us saying Clemson's really good has nothing to do with whether or not you think Notre Dame is going to beat Clemson. Completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant.
I mean, do you think that every team on Notre Dame's schedule is a bad team if Notre Dame beats them? I mean,
yes, we expect Notre Dame to beat every team on their schedule, which means they all suck. That makes no sense to me.
That makes no sense. Yeah, you want them to be good teams, and that's what Clemson is, a very good team. Yeah,
this is going to be a challenging schedule. I'm looking for, and the thing I like about it, Ryan, is if Marcus Freeman's a double-digit winner this year in the regular season, I would like to see 11 or 12 wins, obviously. But if you're a 10-plus win team this year, as long as there's no bad blowouts, this is a well-earned schedule, very well-earned schedule. The way that it's laid out, I think, is good for Notre Dame in a lot of ways. you kind of get your feet wet early. You've kind of got that week 3 for Notre Dame, that week 3 challenge of NC State, but then you get to come back home against a MAC team a week later in preparation for Ohio State. You look at those other 2 teams in between Ohio State and USC. You start saying, boy, this is a tough schedule, but I do think for the most part, it sets up pretty nicely for Notre Dame. You don't have any back-to-back brutal stretches, right? Like there's no Ohio State Duke back-to-back or USC Clemson back-to-back or anything like that. You get 2 games, you get 2 weeks before each of those opponents. You get 2 weeks in between Ohio State and USC, and you get 2 weeks, one of which is a bye between USC and Clemson. And so I think it sets up really nicely for what Notre Dame is trying to do. I do.
I agree. And unfortunately, I saw the chat where the Clemson guys going off, and it's just like they could still be a very good team without being as good as they were in 2018.
That's the thing that's just kind of ridiculous about it. It's like we've literally said, I literally said in this show, this is not a vintage Clemson team. It's like there's this disconnect happening in his head right now.
There's also layers to it, right?
It's like if you're not as good as 2018 Clemson, you suck. Yeah. Like we're not 10-year-olds, right? We're able to say this is a really good football team that's not as good as they were in recent years. Because here's the thing, guys. If they were as good as they were in 2018, you know where they'd be ranked on our schedule? 1.
Yeah.
Number
like
1.
They were going into the 2019 season. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
It's like, I don't mind debating and arguing, but if you're going to debate with me, at least debate something I've actually said. And then don't have a comeback that says exactly what we have said. That's not a great argument. When you say, yeah, but, and your but is something we've already stated, it's not a great argument, right?
Yeah.
But it's a good schedule. It's a talented schedule, and it's a schedule Notre Dame is going to have to. They're going to have to bring it a lot this year. I mean, there's going to be sleepwalking through segments of the schedule. That's for sure.
It's a very tough schedule. I will say this though, for the first time in a few years, I feel like Notre Dame can win every game, and it's been a little bit like
without having to play out of their minds. Would
exactly
like, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
I mean, because there's been some years where I'm like, I could talk myself into them beating this really good team, but like a lot has to go in Notre Dame's direction, right? Like it has to go in their way. I think Notre Dame has a chance legitimately to win every football game on the schedule. So I think that's going to be a very interesting one.
You are correct. You are correct. And we're going to have some interesting conversations about how Notre Dame and Ohio State stack up here as we get ready for that game as well. It's going to be a fun conversation. So that's going to do it for this portion of the show, Ryan. We're going to get to a mailbag next. It's not going to be a super long mailbag, but we're going to get to a mailbag next. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. A programming note, I forgot to do this at the beginning of the show. The next 2 days, our show is going to start at noon, at 12 o'clock noon. Right, Eastern, because Notre Dame informed us today that they've moved their practice schedule. They were doing 9:30 in the morning. They moved it to 2:50 in the afternoon, which means we're going to start at noon and have to be done by 2:30 so I can wrap the show up and get over there. There's a chance Ryan may kind of continue, just finish up the mailbag after I have to bounce. We'll just kind of have to see how the shows are going. But the next 2 days, and then obviously Wednesday, there will be no mailbag because that is the midweek rundown. And then by Friday, we will kind of announce what our in-season schedule is going to be like for next week, because we obviously kick off the season content, man. It's crazy. And also a reminder, Thursday we'll be back to 1 p.m. We'll be back on track on Thursday because there's no schedule, and Ryan will be having a recruiting hour that day as well. Yeah. And then he and I are back on Friday for the Notre Dame football mailbag. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We may do a live show tonight at 9 o'clock on CFB Nation. I'm not sure yet. So make sure that you are subscribed to that as well. Bill Bender and I are going to do a show tonight. I'm just not sure if we're going to go live or not. It depends on, where Bill is and what his schedule's looking like and those type of things. So I'll let y'all know a little bit about that later. But that's why you need to be subscribed to CFB Nation on YouTube and the podcast platform as well. So, Ryan, we're going to move on to the mailbag next. But again, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And if you're not done so already, sign up for the message boards at boards.oursbreakdown.com. It's mailbag time, Ryan. Let's dive into the mailbag. We've got some questions here we're going to dive into, and let's start off with our dude, Rob Osgood.
Rob says, I love that the big 3 are spread out. However, as a coach, how would you get ready for trap games like Duke and Louisville? Thank you guys for the hard work. Great articles on the board.
Ryan, I think the best way to overcome trap games is not anything you do that week. It's just about who you are as a team. It's just about really building in your players a week at a time mentality. And I think there's two ways to do that. One is wrong and one is right. The right way to do it, the wrong way to do it to me is to tamp down the importance of every game. And I think that is something Brian Kelly did that helped him win those trap games, because we didn't see Notre Dame lose a lot of those trap games in the last 4 or 5 years under Kelly, right? I mean, they went undefeated for, I think, from 17 to 21. They didn't lose a single game, I believe, to an unranked opponent, right?
Yep.
They lost the big games. But I think that mentality is exactly why you lose all the big games during that stretch as well, because your team isn't able to emotionally get ready. If your team is always kind of here, not here, that's too high, and you don't want to be here, but just kind of here where you're an intense, passionate team that just brings it every Saturday, and you don't really care who it is. We're Notre Dame. We got something to prove. I think building that edge is how you how you keep yourself from overlooking those trap games. You've got to have good leadership, right? This is a veteran football team. And I do think the one thing that helps Notre Dame a little bit is the presence of Mike Elko being at Duke, although I don't know how much that's going to help Notre Dame, because there aren't any guys left on the team that were recruited by him, to be honest with you, or were here when he was there. I mean, that was all the way back in 2017 now. Think about that. That's just crazy. And so even Sam Hartman wasn't in college when Mike Elko was at Notre Dame. If you think about it, he's a 6-year senior. His freshman year is 2018.
Yeah. Sure.
So, you'd have to be a 7th-year senior to have played under Mike Elko. So I just think it's about just focusing on you every week. Focus on you. Hey, we go out and play our game, to the point that you were saying during the main show, Ryan, is you've got the ability to beat everybody in your schedule. So that means you worry about you. You don't got to play out of your minds to beat Ohio State. You got to play your game. Now, you got to execute at a high level and all that, but you don't need like a bunch of things to go your way like Notre Dame needed in 2020 to beat Bama.
Sure.
Bama in 2020, sure. If they could have forced a couple turnovers, caught a couple breaks, things like that, yeah, they could have beat Bama in 2020 if they caught some breaks. You don't have to even catch breaks to beat these teams. You just got to play your game and play it at a high level. That's the difference that I think, Ryan, I believe that you were alluding to earlier. And so when your focus is on you, I think that's how you avoid sort of the ups and downs of this, where you have the emotional high of being ready for an Ohio State, but then the emotional low of being down for Duke. I think it's just about this football team is going to go out and play with a certain standard, the golden standard, that it doesn't matter who's on the other sideline. We are playing to this level. And I think that helps you in those weeks where maybe you might otherwise overlook an opponent, because the Ohio State Clemsons, they're going to raise your energy just anyway. You don't got to pump that up. But if you're spending all your time tamping it down, then I think that's how you end up not being ready for some of those games.
Well, I think the golden standard is a great way to put it. I think consistency is the biggest thing for me, right? Is that it was a little bit of a up and down kind of exploration of yourself last year in Marcus Freeman's year one. I think year two, coaches mature, players mature, and I think they need to understand and that good programs are built off of the day in and day out consistency, right? You know what to expect. You know what the standard is 100%. And I think that's what you're going to see this year. I do. I think that Marcus Freeman has a year now under his belt of understanding what works, what didn't work, and what needs to be the consistent approach each and every day. Because at the end of the day, Notre Dame players are going to look ahead to the schedule and they're going to see Ohio State, they're going to see Clemson, they're going to see USC. That's naturally going to happen. Those are the big brands in college football. But I think if you're Marcus Freeman, because I think that's the approach, Brian, just based upon the practices you've been at. I mean, they're grinded, man. They're super physical. It's been like day in and day out. It's been
like
a
lot of this,
man.
a lot of intensity, like a lot of yapping, just like getting after it, competition early. Yeah, they're not playing around. Now, how will that translate on Saturday, Ryan? That we don't know yet, right?
I have no idea.
But the point is that you're making also, Ryan, is but that starts now. You don't wait till the week of Duke after you beat Ohio State to start that. You start that now, because that's just got to be who you are. Exactly. And I think that's the whole point that we're making.
Nothing's competition, nothing's given, day in and day out grinds. And I think that honestly, when you have built that into your program of the grind and the work, that you also don't have as much for outside distractions, right? Because the day in and day out of what's on your plate is all you're kind of preoccupied with as well. So I also think that I wouldn't say that it steals your attention, but it kind of does to a degree, right? It's like the laser focus type of thing of this is what you're responsible for today. You got to get through it and you got to beat it. And so I think those individual challenges are a big thing for me.
Next question, Ryan. This is going to be an interesting one. Gideon Rosa. I'm going to ask this one because I want you to answer it, Ryan. I want to hear your answer first. So let me ask Gideon's question. He goes, after Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr., who are your top player concerns that Notre Dame will face? He says, I think Cade Klubnik will take a big jump. I agree that Cade Klubnik will take a big jump, Ryan, but he's not my next group of players that I would be concerned about. But I want to, before I go mine, I'd like to hear yours.
Yeah, I think there's a bucket of players there, Gideon. So it's an interesting question because I think when you look at the schedule, like those are the two superstars on it, right? I mean, that's two of probably the top 5 players that are going to be drafted in the 2024 NFL draft. So I think like if you wanted another player from Ohio State, I think the guy that's kind of got a stamp on his back is Michael Hall Jr. was the one that kind of gave you fits last year, right? Like I think that he's the guy that was an X factor for Ohio State last year, but now he's a guy that Notre Dame looks at and says, that guy gave us fits last year. He caused us a lot of issues. He had a couple sacks against us. He had consistent inside pressure. Michael Hall Jr. is the guy that's going to be on my radar. I'll give you an underrated one. I mentioned him a little bit earlier, but I think that honestly, one of the best players on this schedule that no one even probably knows much of, just kind of for people that don't follow Pitt football, is Matthew Goncalves, who's a left tackle for them. Kid's good, man. Like at preseason All ACC, I think he was first team All ACC last year. 6'6", 320-pound left tackle, had a second-round NFL draft grade this offseason. That kid's a good football player, and I'm worried a little bit about if Pitt gets to Notre Dame of if they don't have a strong side end or a field end that's playing really well, that kid will kick your butt, man. Like he'll kick your butt a little bit. You're going to have to be able to kind of match his physicality. So there's some quality football players on the schedule just in general, Gideon, but I would say Michael Hall Jr. for what he did last year against Notre Dame for Ohio State, and Matthew Goncalves, who's a left tackle for Pitt. Those are two of the guys that really popped to my mind quickly.
Couple for me, Ryan. Obviously, the Ohio State D linemen are concerns, right? I'm not a big Jack Sawyer fan. I think he's overrated. JT's an excellent football player. When he's on, he's really good. Now he's not always on, but he'll be a junior this year, right? So you expect a little bit more consistency. You mentioned Michael Hall was really good. Tommy Eichenberg ate Notre Dame up last year. I mean, he ate Notre Dame up last year. And what I said the other day is, look, you can do a good job of putting all your energy into shutting down Marvin Harrison Jr. and then doing so, but you run the risk of getting whooped by the other guys. You've got to make sure that they don't beat you either. And that's what happened last year with Emeka, right? And you saw with Mayan Williams taking over. I look at NC State. Brendan Armstrong is a concern for me. You've got to make sure he doesn't go off. I mean, on the road, you can't let him get hot early because he can, the nature of that offense can do damage. Notre Dame had some issues at times stopping that offense last year when they had a more mobile quarterback in the game, if you remember. Of course you remember. You were sitting right beside me in that game. But again, a game they should win, but him running that offense and him, it's not so much if you can keep him in the pocket. I don't think Brendan Armstrong is a guy that just sits back and rips you up all day. It's when he gets running around
good athlete.
That he can do some damage and scramble and then pull up and throw it over your head when you come down on it. We talked about Duke and Riley Leonard. That's another guy. Dwayne Carter's a guy that's got some quickness that can be really disruptive inside, that can kind of mess up your run game a little bit. He's a guy that I look at. You look at later in the schedule, obviously against Clemson. Look, you go on the road, you got to make sure Will Shipley doesn't go off, right? You're going to have to make Cade Klubnik beat you, right? I'm still not letting them. This is how Notre Dame's got to be this year, Ryan. You can't go if you want to go on the road, you cannot let that team at home run the football on you. You've got to take that part of your game away. And so that's one for me that I would look at as well. And then Wake Forest receivers are dangerous. I mean, even without Donovan Green, that's still a dangerous receiving core that Notre Dame is going to have to face.
Wake Forest is a really good defensive end. Sheen Davis coming back as well, who's
they have like 13 tackles for loss or something like that last year. He was a productive player.
Everyone talked about the Rondell Bothyard kid who went into the portal, but Sheen Davis was easily their best defensive end last year.
I thought he was a little overrated, to be honest with you. He's the kid that went to Oklahoma, right? Or did he go to USC?
No, he went to Oklahoma. So they're running a 3-3-5.
The Purdue kid went to USC then? I get those two kids confused. Okay.
Yeah, Jack Sullivan went to USC, but the Bothyard kid went to Oklahoma. Apparently they're running a 3-3-5, and he's playing like a base end in a 3.35 at 260 pounds. I'm like, oh, okay.
All
Have fun
righty.
with that.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, that'll
Okay.
work out well. Yeah. Playing some
Yeah.
4-4-I. Have fun. See ya.
Yeah. Here we go.
Next question's from Brandon Plensner. What's up, Brandon? How do you see this upcoming coast to coast conference realignment affecting visitors' attendance, especially in the non-football sports? Do you think this could have a big effect on schools financially? Interesting
Maybe.
question.
I
Yeah.
mean, maybe here's so for teams that are in the top echelon, it won't affect them at all. Because if
Yeah.
let's say that Stanford joins the Big Ten, right? And no Stanford fans show up for Ohio State game. Guess what? Ohio State's still going to pack that stadium, right?
Yeah.
Where it starts hurting teams, it starts hurting like the Indianas, the Purdue's, the
Right.
Rutgers, the teams like that don't have the fan base. They need the 10 to 12 to 15,000 fans from other teams. So when Rutgers plays Ohio State at home, guess what? A lot of Buckeye fans go to that game. When Penn State plays at Rutgers, a lot of Penn State fans are going to be at that game. Same with Michigan. I don't care how loyal Stanford fans might be or Washington fans might be. That's an expensive trip that you have to make 3-4 times a year, right? So you're just going to see a little bit of a loss for that. You're especially going to see that in other sports. I mean, it's going to be hard enough for football. You're going to see that in other sports. The bigger concern for me, Ryan, is there's a lot of moms and dads that now basically don't get to watch their kids ever play in road games in
Right.
those other sports. Now, football, you can kind of do it, but that's still an expensive trip for a West Coast parent. But what if your son's a basketball player or your daughter's a basketball player or a swimmer or whatever, and you're doing these like middle of the week soccer trips and basketball trips, and I got to now take off work, pay buku bucks to fly from the West Coast to the East Coast to see my kid play? That's an unfortunate situation that they're just, again, they don't care. They're not taking that. I think they've probably thought about that. They just don't care. Well, that hurts the parents, but doesn't hurt us. We're going to be making money off this, and that's all that matters. That to me is the bigger financial issue and attendance issue is going to be there's just a lot of parents who aren't going to get a chance to see their kids play, and a lot of games, because I mean half your games are at home and half your games are on the road. I mean that's just the reality of these games, and you're just not going to be able to see that as much. Football will be an issue, but even more so for those other sports, those non-football sports, especially the ones that play games during the week, baseball, soccer, lacrosse. Those type of sports, Ryan, where they don't play Saturdays and Sundays only.
Right.
They play in the week as well.
Yeah. I was actually talking with a buddy yesterday, Brian, because I feel like we've never really talked about that before. It's funny you just mentioned it about the parents being like if I'm a parent of a USC football player next year, let's say, and like, I mean, are you going to have the ability to travel to Ohio State and Penn State and whoever else is in the Midwest team? I mean, it's really kind of cuts off the availability to make those trips and stuff. So, Brandon, I think to the question though, Brandon, I think it could have an effect for sure. I just think that the effect could happen in like a bunch of different areas, right? It's not just the visitor list. Because to Brian's point, like Ohio State's always going to have a great home crowd. Penn State's always going to have a great home crowd. Like, these schools are always going to have great home crowds. So the visitors are still going to come. But Stanford, Indiana in October, like, is someone going to come to that game? Do you want to bring a visitor to that game? Like, I don't know if you want to bring a visitor to that game because you're like, maybe I'll wait until Ohio State comes to Indiana at some point, right? Like, it's just so tough, man. That's why this realignment stuff is so weird, because it's just, I feel like this is getting forced upon us a lot quicker than we thought it was going to have to get forced upon us, and it's going to cause a lot of issues, man. A lot of issues.
And it's also going to hurt some of those West Coast teams. Like if Stanford and Cal get into the Big Ten, it's going to hurt their home attendance, because like if you look at Stanford, Cal, they'll have decent home attendance, for some when they're good. But the part of that is because when they play Notre Dame, for example, I've been to several Stanford Notre Dame games at Stanford. I was at the 11 game, or excuse me, I was at the 11 game. I was at the 13 game. I was at the 15 game out there. I was at the 17 game out there. And every single time there's a big contingent of Notre Dame fans, right? So now they're hosting Rutgers. They're hosting Purdue. They're hosting, you know what I mean? Like, you're telling me those fan bases are going to put 15, 20,000 people in those stands like they do now? No, it's not happening. Not happening. It just isn't. And that but again, they don't care because they're getting their TV money, and that's it. They're getting there's too many people that are, if you're a bad business owner, you're going to obsess over the guaranteed money and
Yeah.
not focus as much on the hidden costs of that guaranteed money. And you're going to miss out on the opportunity to make more money if you're willing to maybe bet on yourself a little bit or be more thoughtful or rational. We're like, hey, we're going to take a chance here. That's one danger you can have as a business owner. The other thing you can have as a business owner is you think you're more important than you are. And that's what killed the Pac-12. The Pac-12 thought they were more important than they were.
Ego.
And
Right.
yeah. And it cost them. It cost them a lot.
Ego costs a lot of people, man.
Yep.
Self-realization is a tough thing for people sometimes.
Yep.
Raymond Harton with the super chat. Raymond, what's up, man? Thank you for the super chat. Great show today, guys. Pumped for the season this year. Go Irish. Yes, sir. Go Irish.
Yep.
Thank you so much. We had a next question from Coach Koch. Says, what do you make of the offensive line situation? Why would they not play Kristofic and Billy? From what I understand, they are both better than who they have given the reps to thus far.
I don't agree that Andrew Kristofic is necessarily better than Rocco Spindler. I mean, that's a battle we kind of thought could happen, right? I mean, you and I even said this summer, I won't be surprised if at some point in time this season, Rocco Spindler ends up being the starting right guard.
That was the conversation at the end of spring, was that he was kind of taking a step forward and really kind of, there was urgency in his game, which was great to see.
Right.
Yeah.
The other one I understand. Like, I get that. Like, I understand both sides of it. I understand the need or the desire for an offensive line coach to say, let's put the kid out there who's just going to do his job snap after snap.
Trust.
I get that. Because if a guard makes a mistake, that means there's a run through. Your running back's getting hit. Your quarterback's getting hit. I understand that. I also understand and sympathetic to the whole, well, that's why I think that Notre Dame did it in the wrong direction. I think they put Coogan in there and basically said Billy's going to have to beat him out, where it's like, but if the criteria is just doing your job every snap, the third-year guy's most likely going to be ahead of the second-year guy.
Right.
What I would have rather seen them do is put Strouth out there early, really work with him, coach him up, and then if he's just not getting better from an execution standpoint, then you can make the switch in the middle of camp to Pat. That's what I think. Whereas now, if let's say Pat can't get the job done because he's not athletic enough or he's not talented enough, now you make the switch to Billy, but Billy lost a bunch of reps working with that first group. That's where I think the mistake was made.
So you
now, hopefully, end of the day, though, Ryan, perfect scenario for me is Billy Strouth and Rocco Spindler the guards. But at the end of the day, if Pat Coogan goes out there and gets the job done, don't care.
Gets the job done. Sure.
Don't care. Just get the job done. That's at the end of the day all I care about. It's nice to have the more talented guy, the upside guy. But if Pat Coogan goes out there and handles his business and Notre Dame is running for 200 yards a game and protecting the quarterback, don't care.
Yep.
Don't really care. Because offensive line at the end of the day is not always about the five most talented guys. It's what five-man group gives you the best unit. And if you got one guy that's just – it's like did you ever break down film of the 2016 Notre Dame offensive line? Like, they were actually pretty good at tackle, left guard, and center. They had Mike McGlinchey at left tackle and Alex Bars at right tackle. And Alex was pretty good that year. You had Quentin Nelson at left guard, and you had Sam Mustipher at center. But the right guard position was a hot mess early in the year. Colin McGovern really struggled. So he had a lot of issues. He was getting beat, and that caused Alex Bars to feel the need to have to help him out more. Sam Mustipher felt he had to help him out more. When they put Mark Harrell in the starting lineup late in the year, the offensive, it was a lot like what Joe Walton and Andrew Kristofic did for Notre Dame in 2021. Is all of a sudden, and all Mark Harrell did was he just did his job. That was it. And they went out in the last three games and averaged over 200 yards a game rushing the last three games. And a lot of it had to do with I just need you to do your job. I don't need you to be Quentin Nelson. I already have a Quentin Nelson. I've got a Mike McGlinchey. I've got an Alex Bars. I've got a Sam Mustipher. 4 guys who've started NFL football games, right?
Yeah.
I just need you not to get beat. Don't get whipped. And Mark Harrell did that. Mark Harrell solidified it and steadied the line a little bit. And I think that's what they're kind of looking at is, look, we got Joe Walt, we got Blake Fisher, we've got Zeke Correll. We just need someone that's going to do their job. And until Billy can prove that he can do his job every snap, I just think this is what they're going to do. I think it's risky. I'm not sure I love it. I don't know that I love the idea of Pat Coogan being the one to, block Michael Hall and those guys that Ohio State's going to have up the middle,
Tyreek and all them.
Tyreek
Yeah.
Williams and those type of guys, Tyleek Williams, excuse me. Having to come off of blocks to have to pick up a hard crashing Tommy Eichenberg like we saw last year. I don't love that idea. But if he proves me wrong, great. I don't care. I just care that the unit plays well. But I understand both sides of that coin when it comes to. I'm a little less sympathetic to it at like receiver, because I can live with a couple mistakes from a receiver if he's good enough. As a former quarterback that played behind a bad offensive line in college, I'm sympathetic to the notion of making sure that you have 5 guys that know how to do their job.
I hope your former offensive linemen aren't listening to this podcast right now.
I doubt it.
From under the bus.
And they knew. I said it to them then.
That's so funny.
That's why they don't like me now and probably aren't listening to the show now.
Well, Coach Koch, I think that for me, this is a situation of Coach Rudolph trusts what Pat Coogan brings to the table. And I think that trust is big for offensive line coaches at times. I'm a big traits and upside guy, right? So like, I wish it would be a different story, but that's kind of where we are right now. Brian, I was thinking about some of the best defensive linemen that Notre Dame, my brain is like super random, but I was thinking about some of the best defensive linemen Notre Dame's going to play this season. I know people were talking about Anthony Lucas. By the way, I was looking at the USC roster the other day. They have Anthony Lucas listed at 265 pounds, by the way. Okay. Which is kind of weird because I thought he was like listed at like 290 something.
He's just one of those kids that's dead set against playing inside. I think that's what it kind of boils down to.
Man,
we'll see. Yeah. I want to see respond to this real quickly too, Ryan. With all due respect, says, do you think the long distances will lower attendance numbers of games? I do, but again, I don't think they care. Attendance has been going down for years, but they don't care. Matter of fact, to the NCAA, that's probably a good thing for them, because if teams can't travel to games, they're still going to watch. They're just going to watch from home. They're going to watch from their TVs. At the end of the day, I think that's what the decision maker. Now, I don't think the schools necessarily like that, Ryan, because they make their money off home games and filling stadiums too. But if you're the SEC, if you're the Big Ten, if the attendance is lower because teams can't travel, that means more eyeballs on TVs. That means this. And ultimately, that's all they care about. And people say, well, no, they care about – no. If they cared about anything other than money, USC and UCLA are not in the Big Ten. Oregon and Washington are not in the Big Ten. Rutgers is not in the Big Ten. Maryland is not in the Big Ten. Okay? If it was about anything other than money, the conferences will look very different right now. Very different. It's nothing but money. So if people can't go to games – and if people have to stay home and watch TV, that's a win for the leaders of these conferences and a win for the networks. That's just the reality of it. And so I think they're okay if attendance goes down, because people who would otherwise attend, Ryan, aren't going to stay home and not watch.
It's football.
They're going to watch.
Right. Exactly.
They're going to just watch from the TV instead of going to a game, which for the decision makers is a win for them.
I wonder if, with all due respect, is in response to me and Vince's thing a couple weeks ago. Did you see that? I don't know if you saw that a couple weeks ago. So it was Charlie Weiss's last belt loop had said something like, I'm talking about Sean Sevillano. He was like, he said something like, with all due respect, I have my concerns.
Oh, yes, I did see that.
Yeah, and I was like, Sean, that's not how respect works.
Yeah. You're saying with all due respect, you're fat and terrible. Yeah. I said with all due respect, sure as heck does. Doesn't mean you can say whatever you want to me. Sure as heck does. Oh boy, that's a great scene, by the way.
With all due respect. Yeah.
Actually, let's go to this one.
Coach Koch, what is the ceiling for Javonte Jean-Baptiste this season? Over under six sacks. Best case scenario in the draft for him.
I would say let's take the first part, Ryan. Over under on sacks. I think that's a fair placement for sacks. I'd say probably 5.5 is probably where I would have placed it, because I like kind of doing the half thing. So it's not.
Oh, you got to do the half, man. You got to do the half.
5.5 is a good over under. I mean, if he gets to that, that's a good year. I don't see him being like an 8, 9, 10 sack guy. I don't think he's gonna have the reps for that. I mean, if he can get to 5, 6 sacks this year, that's a win. That's a successful season for him. A successful season for the Notre Dame defense. My tongue got tied a little bit there. So that would be a good number, honestly, for me. If he can get to 5 or 6, that'd be ideal. If he
Five and a
gets to that
half.
number, Ryan, what does that do
Yeah,
for his draft stock? You can comment on the first part, but then also
sure.
just lead it into your second part.
Yeah. 5.5, I think, is the actual number because I was thinking in my mind between 5 and 6. So that's the number. Coach Koch, if it's at 6, I would probably just say push. Like I think 6 is a decent outcome. Actually, I think it's a very good outcome for Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Best case scenario, he actually had last season a draftable grade, a 7th-round grade from the NFL. So I think the best case scenario is you're talking about midday 3, right? So somewhere in the fifth to 6th round type of conversation. Because I don't think he's going to be a great tester. We already have arm length measurements and size measurements. I mean, he's going to be 6'4.5", 260 plus pounds, and he's going to have 33 plus inch arms and an 80-inch wingspan. So like he fits the mold of a defensive end at the next level. I don't think he's a great athlete though. Like I think he's a good, solid athlete for his size, but I don't think he's great.
He's
So
a good
I don't think
athlete,
yeah,
but not.
he's going to need
He's not Josh Burnham. He's not Jordan Patel-Ho. He's not those guys as an athlete.
Right.
Would you say he's more Adi
athlete.
Takumba Ogundeji than he is because I didn't think Adi was an explosive athlete either. I thought he was a good athlete with really good length.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. Yeah, I can see that a little bit. Yeah, like maybe Khalid Kareem, like that type of, just like strong side, just strong dude, right? Like he has a lot of power in his hands. He's got some pop. I just don't think he's going to be a great tester in the draft process. I think that his draft stock is going to be predicated upon the game film and then whatever all-star game he goes to. If he does well in both capacities, I think he could be a midday 3 type of player, somewhere in the 5th to 6th round conversation. Next question is from Coach Koch. What's up again? Does JD Bertrand top 100 tackles this year, and what does that do for his draft stock?
Well, 100 tackles, the only way he doesn't get to 100 tackles is if he gets hurt. I mean, he had over 100 tackles 2 years ago as a will, and in this particular defense, I think the Mike position is kind of the position that you want him to be. If you look at where he was this year, Ryan, he had 82 tackles this season. He missed 2 full games when you consider getting kicked out of a half of a game because of targeting twice, plus he missed the Navy game. And so if you add those numbers on there and not even take into account the fact that he missed parts of 2 others, you're already getting him near 100 already. Then when you take into account that he also then missed that time in those games he actually did get kicked out, and he's on pace for 100 last year, in a year where he started off very poorly. And I've talked about this before. If you look at his production from a tackles number in like the last 7 games of the year, when he had a little bit better sense of the defense and he knew the timing of it a little bit better and he just had a better feel for what they were doing, he was a guy that was on pace for 100 tackles. I mean, over the course of an entire season. So the number, if you take from Stanford on and you take his tackle numbers, he's on pace for about 110 tackles last year in the last 7 games that he played in. Right. So even if you'd have taken out, even with the injury against Navy, he was on pace for over 100 tackles just in the regular season last season. So if you actually take his average in those games and you put it out just the course of a regular season, he'd have been at 101 just in the regular season, just in the 12-game regular season. So barring injury, and I think they're going to rotate a lot at linebacker this year. I don't think they're going to rotate JD a ton. I think he'll come off, but look, they have a lot of faith in JD Bertrand, and he's very important to what they do. And he's a lot better than Notre Dame fans think he is. So he's just not a guy they want to take off the field a ton. You're going to rotate him. I think you'll put Jack Kaiser there at times. I think we'll see a little bit of Drake Bowen as the season goes on, taking up some of those snaps. But JD Bertrand is not a kid they want to take off the field very much. And if you look at his production on a per snap basis, Ryan, and the other thing I pointed out too is if you look at his numbers in the last half of the year, he had a ton of solo tackles. He was on pace for I think, what did I say? It was 70 something solo tackles at that rate over the course of the season. Yeah. The highest Notre Dame has had is 69 with Jalen Smith. I think is the highest solo tackle number they've had in the last, 16. Jalen Smith had 69 in 2015. That's the last. Tavon Coney was 63 in 2018. Jalen had 69 in 15, 64 in 14. Manti had 55 in 2012, 62 in 2011, and 64 in 2010. JD was almost at a pace of 80 if you look at his last 6 games of the season, right? So it wasn't just him being around the ball a lot. and stacking up those assisted numbers, his solo tackle numbers in the last 6 games he played in was nuts.
Right.
And I think that's going to carry into this year. And so the only way he doesn't get to 100 is if he gets hurt. That'll be a big key.
The thing is, though, is that 100 tackles, JD's done that before, right? I wouldn't be shocked if he got to 100 tackles. I don't think it also would help his draft stock a ton. He's already been productive. I think the things that people want to see from JD is consistency from an NFL draft perspective. I'm talking about consistency. Don't miss tackles, right? Don't miss tackles inside. Don't miss in space. And more impactful plays, I think, is the biggest thing, right? Maybe a couple interceptions, a couple pass breakups, a sack or two. Like more impactful plays on top of being a tackle machine would be a big help, because JD's going to be another kid that I actually think is going to test pretty well.
Yes.
But I don't think he's going to measure that well, right? Like he's going to be 6'1.5", maybe 6'1" on a good day. And he's probably going to have 30-inch arms. Like that's just going to be where it is. It's not going to be great. But if he shows impact and a good tester, I think he has a chance to sneak into the back end of the day 3.
I think what will help him from an NFL standpoint is I think his testing is going to surprise some people. I do.
Yeah,
I think the only thing on
out
the
of 4.6 something in the 40 or something,
high
like
4.5. Yeah. The thing for me, Ryan, the only production numbers that will increase his like that part of his draft grade is if he has a lot of negative production, meaning like
tackle for losses,
tackles for loss. Exactly.
Yeah.
And if he goes out and racks up 105 tackles, but he's got 14 tackles for loss, that's the only thing on the field that will raise that up, because partly to your point, the only way he gets to 14 tackles for loss is if he improves those things. That we've seen JD miss plenty of shots to get plays behind the line in the last couple of years because of that length issue. If he starts cleaning those things up and starting to bring those guys down, then that tackle for loss numbers are going to skyrocket. Because I pointed this out again. If you look at his tackle for loss numbers over the course of the last half of the season, he had 6.5 tackles for loss in the last 6 games. I mean, that's really good. Okay, that's very productive numbers. And if you pace that out over the course of an entire 13 game season, that's 14 tackles for loss. If he does the numbers I just projected off of the last 6-7 games of the year, and he does that over the course of an entire season, you're talking about a guy that's on pace, Ryan, for 110 tackles, 14 tackles for loss. He'd have had like 7 or 8 pass breakups. That production will help him as far as the evaluation part. But at the end of the day, you don't get drafted because you had 110 tackles. You get drafted because your game projects to that next level. Exactly. So I think that those things will be more impactful for like All-American recognition, postseason recognition, things along those lines. I think sometimes as fans, we put a little bit too much into, well, if a guy produces X numbers, how's that improve his draft stock? There are some positions where that matters, but I just watched Will Levis get picked in like the second pick of the second round as a quarterback, and he never threw for 2,900 yards in today's version of college football.
Oh, you want to hear something funny? I was watching the Tennessee preseason game the other night, and he was in, and he overthrew like a deep out or something, and these announcers were losing their minds like, oh, look at the spin off that ball.
It's a freaking incomplete pass.
I threw it like 5 yards over the guys.
It's a nuts, man. People just do not know how to evaluate quarterbacks, dude.
JD is not slow. No. Stop the nonsense in the chat, please. JD
Bertrand, it's the same person that was making the same arguments about Clemson. Just I'm getting to the point now where I just kind of think he's trolling a little bit, to be honest.
Well, it's like people thought the same thing about Drew White, that he was slow, and then he ran 4.65 or whatever he did.
Every testing number Drew White had was better than the Kobe Dean's. Almost every single one. I think vertical is the only one that Kobe Dean had over Drew White. Yeah. So just enough stuff's anyway.
Oh man. Paulie B _27 with the question. He says, what in y'all's opinion is the most important critical stretch of the schedule? And what are your realistic predictions for that stretch? It's a great question. It's that second set of 4 for me, man. That's a tough stretch. That's where it really begins. I mean, because your first 4, we've talked about it, right? You have Navy, Tennessee State, NC State, Central Michigan. All right, it's a tough stretch. But then the Ohio State game really starts a nice little stretch of Duke, and then you go to what was the next one after Duke? It's Duke.
The second, third is Central Michigan, Ohio State, and Duke.
Yeah.
And then the third is Louisville, USC, and Pitt.
Yeah.
And the final third is Clemson, Stanford, or Clemson, Wake, Stanford.
Well, I was talking about that middle. I was talking about the middle four
The
after the
stretch.
first four.
So you're
Yeah.
talking
So
about
that would
Ohio
be
State, Duke,
Duke.
Louisville, USC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a grueling stretch.
Yep.
It's not easy. If you come out of that 3-1 or 4-0, Notre Dame can be a really good football team this year. Really good
100%.
football
Ryan.
team.
That is your
Yeah.
make or break
Yeah.
part of your season. I agree. Now, you can be good during that stretch and still not be who you want to be, because if you drop some games late, you shouldn't. But you can't be who you want to be late if you're not good during that stretch.
Yeah.
100%
Agreed.
agree. 100% agree. I mean, you've got to go into November with with one loss or less. That's just the reality of it. Because if you go into November with one loss or less, and then go on the road and beat Clemson, beat Stanford, and beat Wake, you've made your case, right? You've made your case. And if you're undefeated, obviously, then you're in even better position.
We had next question from Michael Kostrub. Excuse me if I pronounced that incorrectly. Watch the Notre Dame win over Clemson in 2022 again over the weekend. Can this team run over the teams on the 23-3 schedule like they did at Clemson if need be?
Well, I mean, that's hard to do, Ryan. I mean, again, the Clemson game, we have to look at it this way, right? Was it great? Yeah, it was great. Was it a bit of an anomaly? Yeah, it was, because they didn't run like that against Ohio State. They didn't run like that against USC. So you have to ask yourself, okay, can they be that team? They're capable of it, but it's just not something that you're going to do consistently, in my opinion, and win games, because we even saw in 2017. It's the greatest stretch of running the football I've ever seen from Notre Dame football team. With all due respect to the great Lou Holtz teams, when you go back and look at that 2017 stretch of running the football, Ryan, I literally have never seen anything like it. Like, it started against BC. Notre Dame ran for 515 yards, a $182 against Michigan State the next week. By the way, Michigan State that year, Ryan, finished second nationally in rushing yards allowed that season. Then they went for 333 against Miami of Ohio, 341 against North Carolina, 377 against USC, was ranked number 12 in the country, 318 over NC State, who had four of their defensive linemen, all four of their starting defensive linemen were drafted in, I think, the fourth round or higher. And their starting Mike linebacker was a third round pick, who is didn't he make a Pro Bowl in the last couple of years? Yeah, started in the Super Bowl, for the Bengals, and then they went for 380 against Wake Forest. And here's the crazy thing. Again, the numbers are big, right? But you can say, well, you ran the ball enough. They averaged 10.1 yards per carry against BC, 8.5 against Miami of Ohio, 6 against North Carolina, 8 yards a carry against USC, 5.9 against NC State, and 8.3 against Wake Forest. But what happened in November? 109 against Miami, 163 in an ugly win over Navy, 154, only 3.5 per carry in the loss to Stanford. Right? So you've got to have the balance, right? And that's the key, is if Notre Dame has balance offensively because their pass game scares enough people, then they may be able to have more of those rushing games. But they're just not going to go out and run over those teams, because the difference between USC and Ohio State and Clemson is USC and Ohio State were smart enough to say, we're not just going to let them come out and line up and play mano-a-mano football and try to beat that offensive line. They said, we're going to scheme our way to success on top of trusting our players. Ohio State could trust their players more than USC. USC basically said, we're going to make Drew Pine beat us. Simple as that. And he couldn't. Ohio State clogged up the lanes. They had really sound run stunts in that game, Ryan. And they played, of course, individual players played really well, especially inside. But they said, we're not going to let Notre Dame run the ball on us. If you're a good football team, you can do that. Clemson's mistake was they thought they could line up and play their base defense against Notre Dame. That was their mistake. They just lined up and played their base defense, and Notre Dame ripped them up. That's not going to happen this year. I promise you that. Teams are not going to be that stupid unless the pass game can be dangerous. And we've got a question about that, Ryan, that I think might be the time to kind of bring that up. There was a question that came into it. It's from Matthew Wyrick, who's, He says, if you watch a lot of the film from last year, Ohio State stacked the box against us and blitzed us. Do you think teams will play or teams will scheme differently now with Hartman at quarterback? The reality of that question is early in the season, I still think they're going to say, you're not going to beat us running the football. And it's not so much about Sam Hartman. It's, I'm going to make Tobias Merriweather show me he's that player. I'm going to make Chris Tyree show me he's that player. I'm going to make Jaden Thomas and Jaden Greathouse and Deion Colsey and Matt Salerno and Rico Flores show me that they can beat me. It's not about Sam Hartman. It's about them. And the other thing too is when you have a scheme designed to stop the run, it is an easy transition to also being a system that can attack the quarterback in passing downs. Would you agree with that, Ryan? So if I have a really aggressive stack the box thing, it's very easy for me to also then be bringing pass game fires. We saw that at Ohio State last year. Their delay blitz scheme against Notre Dame last year was awesome. I mean, Notre Dame just wasn't prepared for it. And so it was very easy for them to transition their numbers in the run game into numbers in the pass game from a pass rushing standpoint. And so it still comes down to, we're not going to go man-to-man against that offensive line. We're going to try to beat you with numbers and angles and overloads and stuff like that and make your receivers beat us. Because even if we can't, we're going to stop the run, but we're also going to use that to then put pressure on Sam Hartman. And he's going to have to get the ball out quick, and your receivers are going to have to outplay us in one-on-ones. They're going to have to run good routes and get open. They're going to have to do all that stuff. And until they show me that they can do that, I'm still playing Notre Dame kind of similarly to how I played Notre Dame last year, which is your line's not your box. You're not going to beat us in the box man to man. We're going to outnumber you, and you're going to have to beat us on the perimeter. So I do think that teams are going to still do that against Notre Dame. And if they can't beat them and can't make teams pay throwing the football, then they're not going to have a whole lot of games like we saw against Clemson last year. Because again, most teams are not that dumb.
Yeah.
And with all due respect to Clemson, yes, your defensive line is very good. But I mean, a good run game, Notre Dame was able to win the numbers battle. That's football in a lot of ways in the run game, Ryan, is a numbers and a leverage battle in a lot of ways. And Notre Dame was able to get numbers and leverage to sides because Clemson played base. Notre Dame could use motions and shifts and different things with their tight ends and receivers to get duo into situations where they had numbers. So even though, because like here's the thing about a lot of now Notre Dame had their fair share of gash runs up the middle, but a lot of their big runs early were bouncing duo outside. They just sealed everybody inside, and Jaden Thomas would lead the guy kind of around the edge, right? It was like 3rd and 12. They ran duo, and it went for like 20 yards. It was a bounce because Clemson stayed in the box. Notre Dame sealed them off with leverage on their formation and just bounced it outside, right? Ohio State's not doing that. They're not going to let you get the leverage advantage like that. USC wasn't doing that. And that's why you could run over Clemson, who has a better run defense than either one of those teams, but you couldn't run over them because Clemson's plan was unsound. It was sound, but unsound. Does that make sense? Like it was a sound defense. They played their base defense, but it was unsound against what Notre Dame's strengths were. And they're not going to make that mistake again this year. I'll be shocked if they do.
Everyone always talks about the RPO and just talks about the pass off of the RPO, right? Like throwing out, the quick lances or the screens or whatever it might be. But I think what people miss with the RPO conversation sometimes is that you're doing those things because you want to run the football, right? You want to lighten that box. You want to get extra defenders outside to defend those outside passing concepts so that you can run your inside zone and your other running options inside. Like at the core, RPO is a run-oriented system. It's just you're trying to pass the ball in order to get the numbers battle, to get the leverage, like those things. And I think that Notre Dame this year, having Sam Hartman as a legitimate trigger man is a great step. Having more RPO implementation, I think, is a big step. And hopefully having wide receivers that can win more one-on-one matchups, to your point, is a big step to being able to run the football against anyone. Because, yes, there's going to be always the occasional Clemson when you have a good offensive line and you have guys like Audric Estime in the backfield. But then there's going to be games against like USC where they don't respect you enough in the passing game, even in giving up passing in that game, to say, we're going to give you light boxes. You have to force a team to be uncomfortable. And I just want to answer one more thing in the chat, Brian, because I just saw someone say the Georgia linebackers all run 4.4, 4.5. The best Georgia linebacker the last 3 years is Nakobe Dean, who was a 4.7 athlete. Can we please stop the nonsense? Please. Please.
Oh, goodness gracious. Didn't the fastest Georgia linebacker had on that 2021 team, wasn't he a guy that didn't even did Channing Tindall even start on that team? Or who was one of
He
their
didn't
linebackers that
start.
got drafted? Who was the other linebacker they had on that team? It was Tyndall,
So it was Quay Walker.
Quay Walker.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there's just these myths kind of get started about certain guys, right?
Yep.
And like you said, yeah, Quay Walker ran fast at a combine, and so did Channing Tindall. But you made
Yep.
the point. They ran a force. Their best linebacker ran a four. This is what I was talking about. Drew White was faster and more athletic than Nakobe Dean from a testing standpoint. And Drew was pretty athletic. Drew's problem is he was fast and very short arms. And
Yep.
I mean, not fast, excuse me, small and very short arms. He was like barely 220 pounds. That was his problem. But athletically, he was better than Nakobe Dean in almost every metric except I think vertical jump.
Right.
Right. And so you get into these things where you keep convincing yourself that this, and this. But here's the other thing, too, is even if that were true, that's one team. It's one team, right? You're using the anomaly to try to define the rule. So
Yeah.
again, if you're going to talk about saying, well, this guy's not fast because he runs a 4.6, you're out of your mind. The guys that run faster than that are unicorns. They're unicorns. You
Yeah.
can pull up this guy ran this. The guys, they're unicorns. They're not normal. You can say a lot of things about being critical of JD Bertrand, but to say that he's not fast is just it's getting to the point where it's just absurd
It's
at
not
this
even to
point
say
in
that
time,
he's
Ryan.
not fast. It's to say that he's slow. That's what
Yeah,
I like.
it's just silly.
Okay.
It's
All right.
absolutely silly.
Yep.
And you were not okay, whatever. I'm not even you know what? I'm kind of done answering those questions. I'm
Sorry.
it's a
I just saw that. I'm
distraction.
just like, and Kobe
Yeah.
Dean was literally not that great of an athlete, but he was a really good football player. There's a
On a
big
team that won a
difference. Yeah.
championship because of their defense. Exactly. It's
Yes.
just
Yeah.
absurd. It's just I'm just ignoring it from now on. It's just
Irish Gordy, not with a question. Not a question, but Brian, you need to post a video, make a message board post about your return to NFL fandom. Can't wait for the NFL content that follows.
you're going to be sadly disappointed because neither one of those things are going to happen. If I start watching NFL games again, that's a big difference between being a fan of the NFL again, right? I'll watch it. I may, like what the Broncos are doing, but you're not going to see me tweeting and posting a lot about my NFL team. I haven't done that a lot. I didn't even do that even before I stopped really watching the NFL. So sorry, man, you're going to be sadly disappointed if you're waiting on me to ramp up my NFL fandom content on the board or anything like that. It'll be the extent of it'll be like mentioning in a show that I watched it. That's the extent of me discussing my fandom. Here's that question, Ryan. I
It's the
wanted
first
to do.
step. First
Yeah.
step is watching, and then the next step is following. So, yeah.
Mm-mm.
Jay
Here's that
Patterson.
comment earlier that I wanted to respond to.
Gotcha. Jay Patterson says, we have to stop saying that Marshall was a good football team. We should never lose to Marshall or any team like them.
Again, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? This is the whole point is you can say a team is a good football team. Tulsa in 2010 was a good football team. They won 10 games that year. That was a good football team, Ryan. Notre Dame had no business losing to that football team. None.
Yeah.
And so because you say a team is good, that's a whole different animal than saying that they should have that Notre Dame, it was okay for Notre Dame to lose to them. When have we ever said that it was okay that Notre Dame lost that game? When did we ever excuse away or justify Notre Dame losing that game? We've never done that.
We
But that,
literally had like one of the saddest post game shows of all time. Like
yes,
yeah.
yes. But it also doesn't take away from the fact that Marshall's a good. We told you all during the summer Marshall was a good football team. We told you going into that game that Marshall was a good football team. It doesn't, but we also didn't say after the show, see, we told you it's okay to lose to Marshall because they're a really good football team. That's not what we said.
Ever.
So you can do two things at once, right? Like in 2010, Navy was a good football team. 9-4 that year. It was a good football team. Had no business beating Notre Dame. None. Navy in 2009. It's a good football team. They won 10 games that year. Lost by 4 to Ohio State. They had no business beating Notre Dame. I'm sorry. Doesn't take away from it. I can tell you that Marshall's a good football team and still say Notre Dame should win. I can tell you that NC State's a really good football team. Duke is a really good football team for ACC teams. They're 8-9 win caliber teams. Those are good football teams. They're teams Notre Dame should beat. So that's the thing, Jay Patterson, is we have never said it's okay to lose to Marshall. We've never said that, ever. Never once did we say it's okay. Matter of fact, it's one of the things we use as okay, I'm excited about this team, but let's not just assume Notre Dame's going to go on the road and beat Clemson because this is still the same team that lost to Marshall and Stanford. They got to prove that they're not going to lose those games because they're not acceptable. But it still doesn't take away from the fact that Marshall was a good football team last year that had NFL football players on their roster and was probably one of the 3 or 4 best offensive lines they played all year, Ryan. Would you agree with that? That Notre Dame played all year? I would say so. So, yeah, 2 things can be true at the same time.
I agree. We had a question from T. Smith 0323. This is off topic, but who is your favorite WWE superstar? Also, great talking with you on X, Brian. Keep killing it, y'all. You want to talk about X first, or you want to talk about the WWE?
I appreciate you for that one. Favorite WWE superstar?
I was a huge wrestling fan when I was younger. When it turned to WWE, I stopped watching it though. So up until like WWF era, and then I stopped.
So what was the era? Did you watch the Attitude Era?
Because
that was probably the best. That was the Stone Cold, DX, The Rock. That was like I loved the WWF when I was a kid, right? Yes. But just a pure enjoyment. I mean, the Attitude Era to me was the best era. It actually saved the sport because prior to Stone Cold really taking over, WCW was kicking WWE's butt. I mean, it was a better product and better personalities and all that. And then the WCW kind of crashed, and then the Attitude Era saved it. I love that era. I don't know that any of those guys I would consider my favorite WWE superstar. I mean, I was a little kid, so like kind of Hulk Hogan was a guy that I liked a lot, and I liked Macho Man, even though he would always turn heel.
Randy Savage.
Yeah, but he was a great entertainer, man. Yeah.
I like the Slim Jim commercials too.
Yeah. Funny, so. I mean, I don't know that I say I had a favorite. I mean, there was a lot of different ones that I liked, but the best era was the Attitude Era, in my opinion.
My dad's favorite was Bret Hitman Hart.
Yeah, he was good.
I really liked Stone Cold Steve Austin a lot. I actually liked Triple H before he turned into what he is now. Like I liked him as a wrestler though, but
I didn't like him as part of DX. DX just annoyed the crap out of me. It's the same reason I hated the NWO. It's just like every show gets ended because like they come out and like that's what killed the WCW. Like no big fights ever ended. It was Hulk Hogan couldn't wrestle anymore at that point in time. So they had to do this thing where he would wrestle and drop and then the NWO would come out every time he's about to lose. And it was just lame. It got lame after a while, right? And that's kind of how I felt about DX. But that's why one of the best gimmicks they ever did was the lead up. Was it a WrestleMania? But it's when Mike Tyson was the referee for the Stone Cold. It was Stone Cold and Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
And they thought that, Mike Tyson was on their side and he had slaps. And then at the end, he ends up, being with Stone Cold. And but some of those Stone Cold Rock things. And I liked it when Rock, like I liked Rock better when he was a baby face. I didn't like Rock as a heel. He was like Stone Cold was unique because he was kind of a heel that was a baby face, if that makes sense, right? Like he was this jerk that did dumb things, but like no matter what he did, is like they just couldn't stop liking him. You know what I mean? Even when they would try to turn him heel. And that's what I thought made the Rock Stone Cold battle so good, is because fans loved both of them.
Because Stone Cold said so, baby.
Yeah. And and then every time you'd hear something going on, as soon as one of their music would play, you would just get ramped up, right? And every time there's a big brawl and you just heard the Rock's music if you smell, and then you hear the glass break for Stone Cold, it just gets you fired up, man. The Attitude Era was really a great era. It really was. But if I had to say like my favorite wrestlers, it's stuff when I was a kid. Like as a kid, I was more into the individual wrestlers like Sting and the NWA and then the WCW. And then, probably Hogan, when I was a little kid. Cool. When I was a kid, he was, right?
Yeah.
He became a giant D-bag like later. His just I don't know, just like the NWO thing ruined Hulk Hogan for me. It just ruined it. But as far as his overall wrestling, I loved it. I mean, they had great tag teams. They had great, big events. It was really good. I
Do
enjoyed
you
it.
remember when? Do you remember when Hulk Hogan was in Rocky 4? That was a good
Yes,
little
it
cameo
was
there.
Rocky 3. He was
Was it
in
Rocky
Rocky
3?
3. It was the
Oh
one with
yeah,
Mr.
yeah, yeah,
T.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mr. T. Yep,
Was it
you're right.
something lips? Something lips,
Thunder
right?
Lips.
Thunder Lips. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. You just realize how big he was and how small Sylvester Stallone was when
It's
you
like
see that.
I think it was like 6'9" or something like that,
Well,
right?
he
Hulk
was listed
Hogan.
at that.
He's
He's only
huge.
like 6'4", 6'5", but he was
Oh,
listed
really?
at
That's
6'9". Yeah,
it.
that was back when they inflated all the heights and weights.
Yeah.
It was let me see here. What's this? They say, oh, he's 6'7". They listen to 6'7".
Okay.
I've seen him listed at shorter than that. I don't know if he's
Yeah.
necessarily that tall.
He's a big dude, though,
So,
man.
yeah, he is. He's yeah,
scary.
yeah. So, yeah, he's reporting now that he's 6'4", but he used to be 6'7". So because of back surgeries and stuff like that, because he's had a lot of back surgeries and stuff.
Gotcha.
He said he was 6'7" when he first started wrestling, but they had him at like 6'9", and like all these different guys are these inflated weights and stuff like that. But that's when it was like pure entertainment. Like I don't like it now. I've tried watching a little bit in the last few years. I can't get into it. I think I don't know, maybe it's too old for it now or something. Just
I tried watching a little recently, and I'm just like, nah,
Yeah.
I'm good at this point.
like Brock Lesnar just doesn't do it for me, and like
Brock
the
Lesnar.
guys that kind of like, I don't know, I just kind of liked it when the wrestlers were like bigger and just like, they looked almost fictitious characters. Like now they're just like,
Yeah.
they use their real names and it's just like, okay, whatever. Like Steve Austin, that's not his real name. Like it's his name's Steve Williams, right? It's just,
I probably haven't watched him in a few years, but like they also brought up, like, who's that one wrestler that just goes, yes,
oh yeah, Daniel Bryan or something.
I don't even
like
know
that.
his name.
It's like lame. I'm like, dude, he's like little. Like it's like whatever. Yeah, I can't get into that. I can't get into it. I respect the athleticism of the current era, but it just is.
They're great athletes, no doubt.
Yeah.
Question from Corey Dean, mailbag. I heard Navy is going to use 2 quarterbacks against Notre Dame. Thoughts?
I don't really have a lot of thoughts just yet. I still have some film I got to dive into. We'll have more thoughts on it next week, but I got to know a little bit more about those quarterbacks. My understanding is one of them is the kid that started for him last year. It's just a pure option guy, not a great player. And the other kid brings a little bit more of a dual threat ability. Can run the option, but he's a guy that can drop back and throw the football. And I think that's part of it too. If I had to guess, my prediction is they're saying they're going to play 2 because the option kid, they want to still have Notre Dame preparing for the option.
Right.
I think they're going to try to do some different stuff against Notre Dame. And they want Notre Dame still thinking triple. Ryan, you and I talked about this beforehand. That's not going to go well for Navy.
Yeah. If they come out trying to throw the ball, I'm like, cool.
Yeah. Now, it may work against Notre Dame to some degree. I'm talking about long term.
Oh, yeah.
Going away from the triple. As much as I hate it, it works. There's a reason the service academies all run it and need to run it. There's a reason for that.
Tough transition too, man. It's a tough transition. We talked about like Georgia Tech with Paul Johnson, right? Where it's like, look great with Paul Johnson there for a long time. And then once they started trying to go to like more of a traditional offense, you're like, oh, this is going to be a long transition here, man. This is going to be fun.
Yep, no doubt.
Next question is from Call Me. Ty says, I was watching the North Carolina game from last year yesterday. If you were to put in last year's North Carolina team onto the schedule, where would they rank in difficulty?
I mean, if we're looking at a preseason, it'd be down in the bottom half, honestly.
You don't know who Drake May is at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at what North Carolina was at the end of the season, it's still kind of where they were. I mean, middle of the pack, because their defense was terrible. I'd still put Duke ahead of them because I think, because the other thing too is Carolina's game was kind of where NC State is this year, right? It's like you had the BYU game after, but you had a bye week. So it was sandwiched between Cal and a bye. So it wasn't like really in a bad spot. That was the big game of that little 3-week stretch. Their defense was a mess. There was questions about who their running backs are going to be. I like their receiving core a lot. I would have still had them behind, honestly, Ryan, if I could look at last year's team, I'd probably still have them behind Duke, maybe behind NC State for me. I mean, just because, again, a team that's going to upset Notre Dame is not going to be a team that's defense is trash. It's just not. Right? An upset team. It's just not as good as Drake May was. Why could he not beat Notre Dame, but USC could? And Caleb Williams, it's because the town around Caleb Williams is still a lot better than it was at North Carolina.
Sure.
And as bad as USC's defense was, it wasn't as bad as North Carolina's, and USC had a much better offensive line than North Carolina. And as good as the receivers were, I think North Carolina's receivers actually aren't that far off of USC's receivers. You could even argue maybe as good, but the difference at running back was enormous, in my opinion.
Running back, like you said, offensive line, man. Drake May played in some dirty pockets last year, man.
Including against Notre Dame. He had a really clean pocket that first series, and he went right down the field and they scored. But after that, man, Notre Dame was all over him in that game.
Which is going to be good for him long term if we're talking about his prospects at the next level, because he's already had to deal with things not being perfect around him, which is good.
Right.
So,
agree.
Next question is from Brandon Plesner. Said, what happened to North Carolina State quarterback MJ Morris? I believe. Can he seriously not challenge Armstrong for the starting job?
No,
I don't. Banged up, right?
Yeah, he got hurt late in the year. I honestly don't. I don't really know, honestly, at this point in time, Ryan, where that is. But you don't bring in Brendan Armstrong to run that offense and then just not have him be your quarterback. I mean, the difference between him and the other kid is pretty enormous, honestly. Yeah. I mean, with all due respect to MJ Morris, he had some nice games, but he played 3 games. I mean, this is why I say don't get too worked up about what guys do after a few games, because the book's not written on them yet. I mean, I'll go back and point to again, look what Drew Pine did his first 3 starts last year. And then once the book was written on him, you never saw the North Carolina BYU version of Drew Pine again.
Yeah.
Because the book had been written on him. And same thing with MJ. MJ will be a good quarterback. It's just as a second-year player, he's not beating out Brandon Armstrong, who has 3 years of experience running that offense.
I just know he got banged up at the end of the season because Ben Finley played the last couple games for NC State at quarterback. I think that for me, Brandon, the ideal scenario for MJ Morris would be you get your redshirt back this year. If you weren't able to redshirt last year, you stick behind Robert Anae for a year, learn from him. Then you're the quarterback in 2024 for multiple seasons after that. Like, I think that's the trajectory you want, because I think MJ is a completely different quarterback than what Brendan Armstrong is. But I think that there are some attributes that are similar. They're both good athletes. They both have, the similar-ish size. Like, they're not totally different body types. So I think you have to learn from a guy like that and then keep moving forward, man. I think that this could be a beneficial year for MJ Morris to kind of sit back and watch. Next question is from Buellsfeld Financial Services Incorporated. If Navy shocks Notre Dame, what does that mean for Notre Dame college football program? Oh no, JP, I don't want to think about this.
It just, I mean, again, tell me what they do the rest of the year. I mean, that's the reality of it. Is if they lose to Navy, God forbid, but they go out and beat Ohio State, beat everybody else, beat USC, beat Clemson. What does it mean? It means don't schedule a triple option team with a brand new coaching staff in game 1, right? Like, and that means predict years in advance that they're not going to have a coaching change because you had already scheduled the game. I mean, that's what it would mean. Now, if they lose that game and it's the beginning of another 8-4 season, that's a bad sign, right? That's a bad sign. But we'd need way more context. But I don't even know, my man. I don't even know why you're putting that out in the universe right now, my friend.
I know, man. It's so sad to think about. I don't want to think about that at all. Andre Tonsel says, who is most intriguing 2025 recruits on offense and defense? You could take that a few different ways, right? Like, what do you mean by most intriguing?
Yeah. Take it however you want to take it, Ryan.
I mean, most intriguing for me is like, I usually think of guys that maybe are making transitions or guys that have a little bit of volatility to them, is like, as far as there's development
or
that still needs to happen.
Maybe.
Yeah.
The impact that kid could have on the class. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can go a million different directions on that one. I mean, I think
go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say intriguing for me is like Deuce Knight, because again, I think that Deuce Knight has maybe the best tools of any quarterback in 2025, but he's not there yet, obviously. And him picking Notre Dame as a Mississippi kid would be a pretty intriguing storyline, right? Like, that would be very intriguing.
Yeah.
Defensively, I think that for me, Jadon Blair out of North Carolina, the safety, is most intriguing because he is 6'4", 180 plus pounds. And I think most people's thoughts would go, is he a rover? Is he a linebacker eventually? I'm like, nope, that guy is
He's
just
a
a
safety.
supersized athlete playing safety.
Long,
So
skinny,
yeah,
smooth. Yep.
yep.
I like Jadon Blair on defense. I like that one. Offensively intriguing. You are correct. Taylon Taylor's the best player on the offensive board for me. But the most intriguing is Deuce, in my view. I think that's definitely the most intriguing one. Yeah.
He's really intriguing.
Yep.
Next question is from Andrew Kenny, who says, how do you think our secondary will fare against Marvin Harrison Jr.?
We're going to get asked this question a lot between now and the season because we've already been asked this a few times.
Yeah.
Look, how do I think? I think they can do what I talked about last week, Ryan. The goal against this version of Marvin Harrison Jr., first of all, we've seen this secondary go against Marvin Harrison Jr. And they held him to 5 catches for 56 yards, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? They held Ohio State to one of its worst non-40-mile-an-hour wind game statistics, right? They made him work for his yards, and that's how you do it, right? And what I said was, I don't really care what Marvin Harrison's numbers are at the end of that game, unless they're like, even if he's like 10 catches for 190 yards, Ryan, 220 yards, I don't care. Make him work for those yards.
Yep.
And my point is, we've seen a receiver come out against Notre Dame and put up monster numbers in a game where Notre Dame dominated the game. We saw this not that long ago, right? Do you remember the numbers that Drake London had against Notre Dame 2 years ago?
It's like 15 for 170, right? Or something.
15 for 171. Yeah. And guess what? Notre Dame won that game by 15, and it wasn't really that close because nobody else did anything that game that hurt you. And you made him work for those numbers. And so to me, when I look at it, is if Marvin goes out there and has like 8 catches for 125 yards, it's a good game against this secondary. It's a pretty good game. But my thing is going to be, tell me what the yard per target numbers are. Tell me how many times they had to get it to him, throw it to him to get those numbers. If he has 8 catches for 125 yards on 11 targets, that's not good work for Notre Dame. That means he had a really big day. And you know, the efficiency is really impressive in that game, right? The thing I care more about is where was he from if he's going to get those 8, I want to see it to where it's 14, 15 targets, right? That's what I care more about, Ryan. It's did you make him work for that action? That's what I care more about. It's not so much the numbers. It's what did you do overall? So like last year, you look at Marvin Harrison, he had 5 catches for 56 yards. They targeted him 11 times. He went 2 for 4 against Cam Hart and 0 for 2 against Benjamin Morrison. And Benjamin Morrison had a breakup on him. If he has a similar percentage and I don't care if he has 8 catches, if it's 8 catches for 120 yards on 17 targets, it's a win for Notre Dame in that matchup. But here's where the key is. You can all talk about Marvin Harrison all you want. I don't care what his numbers are as long as it's a high volume target number, right? Where it's a lower efficiency number. But you can't let the other guys beat you. And you want to know why Notre Dame had lost that game? Emeka Egbuka had 9 catches for 90 yards, 11 targets. It's a very high number. The yard for target for Marvin Harrison last year was what? 5.5?
Which isn't very good.
Right? Yeah. No. But Emeka was over 8 because they went 11 targets for 90 yards. You look at Xavier Johnson, 2 targets, 2 catches, 34 yards and a touchdown. Cade Stover, 4 targets, 3 catches, right? Like you can't let those other guys beat you.
Yep.
Can't. That's the key. You just can't let those guys beat you. And if they can do that, then I'm good. I'm good. Like Cam Hart gave up 4 completions last year for 54 yards against them, right? And including a touchdown. But they did it on 7-8 targets, right? I mean, that's the key. They went 1 for 3 against Benjamin Morrison. You can't let the other guys not name Marvin Harrison to put up the big numbers and make the money plays. That's the big thing for me. I think sometimes you can get so obsessed with shutting down one guy that you then lose sight of, okay, yeah, you did a lot to make him work, but this other guy just went and ripped you up. But if you're just try to play man-to-man against Emeka Egbuka because you're trying to double and triple Marvin Harrison, Emeka's going to go off. You've got to play well in all scenarios and the biggest thing is put pressure on the quarterback. That's going to be the big key.
Agreed.
But, I really don't care what the numbers that Marvin Harrison gets are. It's just you got to make him work for it and then not let the other guys go off. That's a lot more important for me.
Efficiency,
Yeah.
I think, is what you need to see.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
We had a question from Nathan Milton. What's up, Nathan? How much stock do you put into home field advantage? Depends what the school is, man. It depends. I mean, at Notre Dame, I think home field advantage can matter if they pack the seats, right? At Clemson is certainly an advantage. I think if you are a program where your fans are rabid and they want to come to games and they want to be a part of it, right? They want to have that impact.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that is tremendous. If you're a not great football team, though, if you're Stanford, like home field advantage doesn't really exist. It doesn't really. But I think that if you have a great fan base, home field advantage matters very much. Personally, I always play better at away games. I felt like I was a little less on edge, being around more people that I knew, all that type of stuff. But home field advantage, I think, can be very good for programs that fan bases care about the team, for sure.
Yeah. Like you said, Ryan, it depends on the team. One of the things that Brian Kelly did really well in his last few years at Notre Dame is he won all his home games except for 2021 Cincinnati, right? Now you could argue they didn't play a ton of great teams, but they whooped a pretty good 2017 USC team at home by 35. Like they won at home.
Yeah.
In other eras at Notre Dame, they weren't as good. I would argue this. I felt in 2012 Notre Dame was better away from home than they were at home.
Yeah.
If you remember, they had an ugly win over Purdue that year at home. They beat Michigan 13-6 in a game where Michigan turned it over like 3 times in the red zone. Notre Dame struggled to score in that game. They had a overtime 20-13 win at home over Stanford. It was a good win, but it was an ugly win. They beat BYU 17-14 that year. They only beat Pitt by 3 in double overtime that year. And then they had a big win over Wake Forest. They beat, at the time, a 10th ranked Michigan State 20-3 on the road. They blew out Miami 41-3 in Chicago. They beat Oklahoma on the road 30-13, and then beat BC 21-6 on the road. And they went on the road in the last game of the year and beat USC. For whatever reason, that team, when they were on the road, they had this us against the world mentality, and they were at their best when the other team's crowd was louder and all this kind of stuff. It just varies team by team. Right. Yeah. And, last year, Notre Dame wasn't as good away from the road as consistently. Like they had a couple really impressive road games last year. You think of the North Carolina game, it was a pretty good one. Syracuse wasn't bad. They didn't play very well away from home against USC. They didn't play very well away from home against Ohio State. They were sloppy against BYU. They just were the better team. I mean, I didn't think Notre Dame necessarily played great against BYU. They just were better than BYU. I mean, they just physically whooped them and had better athletes. But I didn't think they played well necessarily against BYU, and certainly didn't play well against Navy away from home either. Yeah. So, we'll see how it's going to be, but it just depends on the team, Ryan. And do I put stock in home field advantage? If you have proven and established it, yes, I do. But I've always said this, Ryan, home field advantage has a lot more to do with the quality of the team than it does about being at home. Alabama had some really bad home losses before Nick Saban showed up and in his first year.
Yeah.
Right. Louisiana, Nick Saban, the greatest coach of this generation at Alabama, has a home loss to Louisiana Monroe on his resume.
That was a crazy game. Yeah.
Right. That's not happening now. But at the time, that was a bad Alabama team, and he was rebuilding it. He rebuilt it pretty quickly because the next year they went 12-1 and lost in the Sugar Bowl to Utah. Really good Utah team. And then in year 3, they won a national championship. So you can get it turned around quickly, but did Alabama become a tougher place to play for any reason arbitrarily to the stadium or the loudness or the ushers? No, it's because Alabama got better. That's the primary home field advantage. And I think the one thing that can help you as a home team, if you're run correctly, is football players and coaches are creatures of habit, and it's a little easier to be in your routine at home, in my opinion, because you don't have the travel. Now, sometimes it can be good to play on the road, Ryan, because, everything is really structured. But I just think usually the routine is easier to keep when you're at home than when you are on the road.
It's very fair. Conrad asks, do you think Notre Dame fans will show out for the Ohio State game, or do you think it will be similar circumstance to Georgia 2017?
The Notre Dame fans that are there will show out. Do I think
Yes.
that there's going to be a large Ohio State contingent? Yes, I do, because the fans that don't show up will sell their tickets to Ohio State fans. So, look, I hope that I'm wrong on this, but I think I've said this before. I don't really care at this point in time about I don't care. I don't predict that Notre Dame's gonna be able to not have a lot of Ohio State people.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. Until they prove otherwise, Notre Dame fans are gonna sell their tickets. It just until that we see it not be that way. Right? Ryan, you were at the Cincinnati game 2021.
Yeah.
There's a ton of Cincinnati fans there. That was two
gross.
top 10 teams. Undefeated Notre Dame, undefeated Cincinnati, and a bunch of Notre Dame fans still sold their tickets.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's just the reality of it.
Cincinnati fans were heckling Notre Dame fans too, man. It was an ugly sight. Very ugly sight.
It was. It really was. It kind of disgusts me. If I was Notre Dame, I would find out who sold their tickets to those games, and I would say, you're back on the waiting list next year. It's simple as that. I wouldn't let people you get the block sales, and there's a lot of things you can do to limit it, but I just don't think Notre Dame cares, because as long as it's getting sold and they're making money off of it, I don't think they care as much about, again, it's like, are people making money decisions or what's best for the football program decisions? Notre Dame's making, in these instances, money decisions, not about what creates the best home field environment. That's just the reality of it.
I agree. We had Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says, mailbag. This is the overall fastest team Notre Dame has had since. Thank you guys for all you do.
2015. Yeah. Here's the argument that I would make, Ryan. The 2015 team, for guys that played, the 2015 was faster at the top. There's nobody on this offense as explosive as Will Fuller. Chris Tyree is close, but he's not as explosive as Will Fuller. And he hasn't proven that he can consistently be the playmaker Will Fuller was, obviously.
Sure.
Defensively, we talk about how people don't give the linebackers enough credit for how athletic they are. None of them are in Jalen's category. None of them are in Jalen's league. Kavari Russell was really fast. I would argue that Kavari Russell probably would test better. I think Kavari ran like a low 4.4, if I remember correctly.
He ran 4.4 something, I think he had a high vertical too. So
he was fast in that regard. So they had some guys that were really athletic at the top. Yeah. What I would say about this team is they may not have the Will Fuller on O, Jalen Smith on D, but depth of speed is much better. Right? Because that was a pretty fast receiving core. All your guys were sub 4.5s. Chris Brown was a 4.4 guy. Amir Carlisle was a 4.4 guy. Will Fuller was a 4.3 guy. CJ Procise was a 4.4 guy. So, you had some speed on there. But I think this team just, especially more so defensively than offensively, just the depth of speed. I don't think this Notre Dame team offensively has the speed that the 2015 team did. I just don't.
Yeah.
Especially in the starting lineup. But that doesn't mean they don't have good speed. They do. It's just that team was burners,
Yeah.
Josh Adams was your number 3 running back to start the year, and he ran a 4.48 coming out on a busted up foot. You know what I mean? That team had some home run hitters. This team doesn't have as many of those. Defensively, however, I just think the overall level of athleticism and speed is better on defense after the first top couple guys. Right? That's just kind of how I look at it. But this is the fastest team since 2015. You
could argue at several defensive positions, the deeper you get into the depth, the faster they might get in certain
100%.
spots, which is pretty
You start
crazy.
getting into Marcus Freeman recruits, and that's 100% correct, Ryan. 100% correct. I would argue there's a chance that Christian Gray might be the fastest corner they have if you compare him to the veterans, and he's not even the fastest corner in his class.
I know, like a bell.
Right?
Yeah.
So they got some dudes that can run now.
Yeah.
Got some dudes that can run.
Next question is from David Lowe. Says, I've never been to a Notre Dame game before. I never hear anything about our stadium environment. How is it?
Depends on the game.
Yep.
I've been to some games, Ryan, where it's amazing. The Texas game in 15 was awesome. The Michigan game in 14 was amazing because they jumped on Michigan early. The 18 Michigan game was outstanding. The 17 USC game was crazy loud. The 2021 Ohio State game, terrible. Cincinnati game, terrible. The environment at the Marshall game last year was terrible. Now, part of that was the team didn't play well, but there was no energy for that game. We've seen some home games that were pretty blah from a fan standpoint. So it just depends on the quality of opponent. Notre Dame fans are very loyal to their team, but when it comes to the home crowd, because it's not, I say this again, it's not your typical home crowd. It's not just a bunch of blue collar local people that are just love Ohio State or love Penn State. This is a different type of crowd that's maybe not as rowdy as the crowd used to be back in the day. Back in the 80s, the crowd was a little bit different. It was a different type of crowd. I mean, you talk to Lou Samoji and Tim O'Malley and Tim Priester and those guys, they'll tell you, the loudest environment they ever heard was a 1988 Miami game. There's 59,000 people in the stands. That's it. 59,000 people, because that's all the stadium held. And so, again, now those were some great teams and some great matchups. The other thing that's hurt Notre Dame's crowd in recent years, Ryan, too, in fairness to the fans, is they haven't played a lot of very good teams at home in recent years.
Very true.
Like they've had some years where the home schedule was really bad.
2020 was really bad, right?
Yeah. 2021 and 2020 was bad, because the big game in 2021 was Cincinnati. With all due respect, that's just not a game that's going to fire up Notre Dame fans. It should have, because that's a really good football team, but it's not. 2020 home schedule was actually would have been good if not for COVID, because you had Florida State at home and you had Clemson at home. So that's two big teams, but you couldn't have anybody at those games. The 2019 home schedule was bad. It was New Mexico, Virginia, Bowling Green, Virginia Tech, and Boston College in a not very good USC team. So they've had some really bad home schedules in recent years. Last year's home schedule wasn't great either. You had Marshall, Cal, Stanford, UNLV, Boston College aren't good enough to, to bounce. The Clemson crowd was great, but it was just one good game. The rest of the home schedule sucked. So it's a little different from when you look at 1988, Ryan, when Notre Dame won the national title. They had Michigan at home. They had Miami at home. It was a little bit of, you'd have 2-3 huge games a year and at home against top 5 teams, and then you'd get your rivalry games, So you had Michigan at home, Purdue at home, Stanford at home, Miami at home, Penn State at home. Think about that. In one year, Notre Dame played Michigan, Miami, and Penn State at home, on top of Purdue and Stanford, and Air Force, which at the time Notre Dame played often. 1988, Michigan State at home, USC at home, a number 7 Pitt team at home. And, back then Pitt and Notre Dame was a little bit of a different type of rivalry than it is now. So it's different, man. 93, you had Florida State at home, you had Northwestern at home. So that was a local game. You had Michigan State at home, which was a rivalry, Pitt at home. And so you had USC, Florida State, Boston College, which at the time was a much better program, Pitt and Michigan State at home, and Northwestern. Right? That's a little different than Bowling Green and New Mexico, right? When your worst home games, Ryan, are against Northwestern and Michigan State and Pitt, that's a whole lot different than your home games are Marshall and who were the home games against last year? Marshall and Cal, and 20 in 2019, I think your first 2 home games were New Mexico and Bowling Green and Virginia.
The Fighting Bob Davies, man.
Yeah, man. It's that's just a Virginia. This is their home schedule in 2019. New Mexico, Virginia, Bowling Green, a bad USC team, Virginia Tech, Navy, and Boston College. Right? 2021, it's a bad USC team, Toledo, Purdue, Cincinnati, North Carolina, Navy, and Georgia Tech. It's a different animal, man. It really is a different animal. And, I don't know that there's a lot they can do about it. That's one of the negatives, the downsides of the ACC schedule is there's just years you're going to get not very good ACC teams at home.
Yep.
And their crowd doesn't travel as well. But
one word of advice for David. David, go to a Notre Dame game, man. It's a great experience. Just go do it.
Because your first would you say this, Ryan? Your first experience, it doesn't matter who the opponent is. It's just that kind of deal. Yeah.
Get there at 9 or 10 a.m. Just walk around the campus for a few hours, man. Then find your way into the parking lot for the tailgaters and everything, and then get into that stadium early, man. It's a great experience.
I always say if you can get in there Friday and just kind of see the town, and it's a pretty cool deal, man.
Go to Legends and do it all,
Yep.
man. Do it up.
Yep.
Do it up. Conrad, do you think Maris Loifau will make the jump to the next level this year? When will the staff cut their losses and start playing younger guys?
I'm making no predictions on Maris Loifau this season. None.
I hope
Yeah.
Maris Loifau makes a jump, but we shall see. I hope.
Yeah.
Still a really talented athlete, man, if he can figure it out. But
I hate to break it to y'all, but if Maris Loifau gets benched, it's going to be for Jack Kaiser, not. I mean, for all the people who want to see the younger players, it's not going to be for Jalen Sneed. It's going to be for Jack Kaiser, because Jalen Sneed is legitimately still really way too inconsistent to put in a starting lineup. You got to find a niche for him right now and just turn him loose. I mean, you've got to use Jalen Sneed, but just having him be a starting linebacker right now is not where you need to be with him right now. And I think this is going to be the last one here, Ryan.
Archer 452 says Bruce Feldman has his freaks list every year. Who is the freakiest athlete on each side of the ball this year for Notre Dame? Great
freakiest
question.
Athletes. That's a good question. Ryan, I think on defense, it's kind of easy, I would say. I mean, that's Micah Bell. It's hard for me to go anywhere other than Micah Bell on that one.
How about Cam Hart for the height, weight, speed conversation?
Yeah,
He's
the pound for
freaky.
pound thing. Yeah.
It's pretty freaky.
I would say Josh Burnham, if I'm going to go pound for pound, would probably be the freakiest.
Jason Onye, maybe. He's
maybe
freaky too. Yeah.
Although he's a little bit too, maybe the lateralness may not be quite, but yeah, he's got some twitchiness to him, man. Offensively, it's going to be a lot of the younger guys. It's going to be Jadarian Price, Braylon James's. I would have to say if I had to pick one guy, it's probably Jeremiah Love.
That's a good
probably
one.
my one.
Yeah.
That would be my one.
Chris Tyree, Jeremiah Love, a couple of those.
Yeah. Reason I would go
James,
with Love,
I'm sure, does some freaky stuff. But
yeah. I would go with Braylon James because Chris Tyree right now has just shown himself to be fast.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a freaky athlete that's doing like, the Tavon Austin stuff, right? Like that's just not what he's been. Jeremiah Love has a little bit of he's taller. He's fast. He's not as fast as Chris Tyree. Nobody on offense is, but he's shifty. He's got agility. Yeah. I think if I had to go, like that's where I think Braylon James is the guy that I think could really. Jadarian Price pre-injury would have been in this conversation as well, but Braylon James and Jeremiah Love, that height, length, elusiveness, agility conversation would be for me. But if I had to pick one, I'd probably go Jeremiah Love. Right now, probably be my one.
I wonder, because freak can mean a couple different things, right? Like, I mean, Joe Alt's probably got pretty good testing numbers, I would assume, and he's 6'7", 320 pounds, right? Like that's pretty freaky as well. So, yeah, I mean, Jeremiah Love, I think makes a lot of sense. Braylon James, I would be here's a take, which I would love people's opinion on. I would be surprised if Braylon James is not on a freaks list one time during his Notre Dame career. Yeah. I'd be very surprised. I think he's going to put up some freaky stuff, man.
So if you're trying to argue that anyone is faster on this team than Micah Bell, stop. Just please stop.
I think they heard you out of context because you said Christian Gray might be the fastest out of all the returners.
Comparing like the old, but then I followed that up with, but he's not even the fastest guy in his class.
I know.
So yeah, those would be guys that I would kind of go with. Those would be mine.
Yeah,
those would be mine. Anybody else you can think of, Ryan? Like if you had to pick one for each position, I'd probably go Josh Burnham at defensive line.
Okay.
I'd go Drake Bone at linebacker.
Okay.
I'd go. You might get me on the Cam Hart thing, Ryan. Like I get that one. I'm still going Micah Bell because his speed is so nutty, like testing wise, and he's a jumper. You don't see a lot of 5'9.5" long jumpers putting up the numbers he's jumping like lengthwise. Aren't most really good long jumpers like kind of longer, taller guys, right?
Yeah, like Cam Williams of the world.
Yeah. And he's 5'9.5". So I still go Micah Bell at corner. Safety, I'd probably go Xavier Watts. I think he's he may not be fast, but he just moves differently than everybody else at safety. Quarterback, they're none of the above. Running back, Jeremiah Love. Receiver, Braylon James for all around. Chris Tyree for speed.
Yeah.
Tight end, Eli Raridan, if he's healthy,
Oh,
is
Eli,
really
yeah.
freaky athletic.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. O-line, would you say, I mean, I think Joe Waltz probably would be
Or
my,
Charles Jagasaw in the
his
future.
pound for,
Yeah.
he's an interesting one
Because
too.
they also put like weight room stuff into the
Yeah.
freaky categories too.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Like that power and explosiveness. Yeah, I get that
yep.
one. I get that one. So those are my pound. And then Spencer Schrader, Ryan, I don't know if you haven't had a chance to see this yet, but that kid is an athlete.
He looks
Like
like it.
you just watch him and just how he approaches the ball and just the leg swing. It's just, man, he is a really good athlete. And I'll tell you something else. We haven't talked a lot about it. Bryce McPherson has a bomb. When he's on, he can boom the football, man.
I mean, he averaged like 47 a punt as a senior or something like that.
Yeah, I was loving how he was coming off of his foot, man.
It's
I
good to hear,
really,
man. I was
really
I was
liked it.
worried he was going to pull a Harrison Leonard on us, so hopefully it continues to develop. We'll see.
Yeah. We'll see how it goes, but I really enjoyed those type of things very much so.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, hey, Ryan, enjoyed it, man. Why don't you go ahead and take people talking about Estime. Estime's a tank.
Yes.
I don't know. David Lowe, Estime's a beast. Yeah, but I just don't think he's in the same. And this says a lot about the rest of the running back room. He's just not in the same category those other guys as just explosive athleticism.
If you're just talking about like weight room numbers, maybe. I mean, sometimes Bruce throws that in there, right? But
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But appreciate you all for joining us today on a little bit of a Notre Dame 2023 football schedule. We ranked the hardest games in Notre Dame's schedule coming up on the season because, folks, we are 1 week away from a game week, which is absolutely incredible. We will be back. Of course, IB Nation Sports Talk will be tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at noon Eastern to be able to talk a little bit more Notre Dame football throughout the week. The Notre Dame recruiting hour, which is usually scheduled for Mondays, will be Thursday this week, just in case you missed an announcement earlier today. So before you leave, you can please hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast. That notification bell will keep you reminded for tomorrow that the next 2 days will be at 12 o'clock. Also go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. Before we came on today, Brian put together a little bit of an intel piece that we had been gathering over the last couple of days.
I wrote it. Ryan got a lot of the intel, just so we're clear.
It's a team effort, man. It's a team effort.
Right.
So
that's right.
boards.irishbreakdown.com for your latest recruiting and team intel and info as we inch closer and closer to the Notre Dame season. As always, go Irish. We appreciate you. I am Ryan from Brian. Thank you all and see you all next time very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.